Morning. Notice the time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by publicizing same in the Omaha World Herald, OPPD outlets, newsletter, OPPD.com, and social media, by displaying such notice on the arcade level of Energy Plaza, and by emailing such notice to each of the district's directors on September 15th, 2023. Thank you all for joining us remotely via WebEx events. As a reminder to board members, executive leadership team, and OPPD staff, please mute your microphones to reduce background noise. To members of the public, thank you for attending. You are in listen-only mode. If you have any technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. Our agenda for today's meeting is as follows. We will conduct a closed session this morning to discuss 4 topics: corporate officer performance reviews and compensation adjustments, CEO performance review and compensation adjustment, enterprise risk management quarterly update, and near-term generation strategic partner. We will conclude this morning's closed session no later than 9:50 a.m. in order to open the WebEx meetings to allow the public and OPPD staff to join. We'll begin the public session at approximately 10 o'clock a.m. and receive reports from each committee. Director Bogner, do we have a motion to go into closed session?
I move that the board go into closed session at this time, 8:01 a.m. to discuss 4 topics: corporate officer performance review and compensation adjustments, CEO performance review and compensation adjustment, enterprise risk management quarterly update, and near-term generation strategic partner. With respect to the corporate officer performance reviews and compensation adjustments, a closed session is necessary because the discussion will involve competitive and confidential compensation and retention information, as well as performance evaluation information. A closed session discussion is necessary to prevent needless injury to the reputations of the corporate officers, and none have requested a public meeting. With respect to the CEO performance review and compensation adjustment for Javier Fernandez, a closed session is necessary because the discussion will involve competitive and confidential compensation and retention information, as well as performance evaluation information. A closed session is necessary to prevent needless injury to the reputation of Mr. Fernandez, and he has not requested a public meeting. With respect to the enterprise risk management quarterly update, a closed session is necessary for the protection of the public interest because the discussion involves matters that are confidential and protected by the attorney-client privilege and attorney work product doctrine, and involve a discussion of security for district property and utility infrastructure information. With respect to the near-term generation strategic partner, a closed session is necessary for the protection of the public interest because the discussion involves sensitive utility information, infrastructure information, confidential cost information, and potential resource acquisition strategies, the disclosure of which would disadvantage the district in future negotiations with potential contractors. This requires a second.
Second.
Director Wagner? Yes.
Director Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Director Ford?
Yes.
Director Howard? Director Mulhall?
Yes.
Director Moody?
Yes.
Director Spurgeon? Director Williams?
Yes. The motion to go into closed session has passed. This closed session will be limited to discussion regarding 4 topics: corporate officer performance reviews and compensation adjustments, CEO performance review and compensation adjustment, enterprise risk management quarterly update, and near-term generation strategic partner. A motion and a second is required to reconvene in open session.
So moved.
Second. Director Wagner?
Yes.
Director Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Director Ford?
Yes.
Director Howard absent. Director Mulhall?
Yes.
Director Moody?
Yes.
Director Spurgeon?
Yes.
Director Williams?
Yes. The motion to come out of closed session at 10:08 a.m. is carried. The closed session was limited to discussion regarding 4 topics: corporate officer performance reviews and compensation adjustments, CEO performance review and compensation adjustments, enterprise risk management quarterly update, and near-term generation strategic partner. Notice of the time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by publicizing the same in the Omaha World Herald, OPPD outlets, newsletter, OPPD.com, and social media, by displaying such notice on the arcade level of Energy Plaza, and by emailing such notice to each of the district's directors on September 15th, 2023. Thank you all for joining us remotely via WebEx events. As a reminder to the board members and executive leadership, and OPPD staff, please mute your microphone and turn off your cell phones to reduce background noise. To members of the public, thank you for attending. You are in listen-only mode. If you have any technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. Per the board's guidelines for public participation, we do not take public comment during the all committee meeting today. We will take public comment at the board meeting on Thursday, September 21st, which will be conducted in person at the Omaha Douglas Civic Center and will begin at 5:00 p.m. The public may attend in person or remotely via WebEx events by going to OPPD.com. Joining me today in person are my fellow board members, Amanda Faulkner, Mike Cavanaugh, Matt Core, Janice Molhoff, Craig Moody, and Mary Spurgeon. Director Sarah Howard has notified us of an absence for today. We also have members of our executive leadership team, our general counsel, Steve Bruckner with the Fraser Stryker Law Firm, and OPPD staff. Additionally, we have 20 attendees in the meeting consisting of OPPD employees and members of the public. Today, we'll hear the following committee reports. Governance report from Director Faulkner, Finance Committee report from Dr. Spurgeon, an update from the Customer and Public Engagement Committee, and the Systems Management and Nuclear Oversight Committee report from Director Moody. Javier, will you please give us the safety brief?
Certainly. Good morning. My name is Alex Bottorff with Corporate Security. I'm going to begin with our physical security brief for safety. If anyone is feeling ill or they have a medical condition that may elevate, please let somebody know, whether it is a colleague, a supervisor, or someone at home. Be cognizant of slips, trips, and falls. We are in a room with many tables, chairs, cords. Please be careful of that. Slips, trips, and falls are a major cause of injury. In our building today at Blue Cross Blue Shield, the closest AED and first aid kit would be located at the front desk. The closest fire extinguisher is at the opposite of this wall towards the corner. If there is a fire, our two main exits are the exit over here and the exit over here. And if there are any other concerns, please let security know. Do remember, we practice run, hide, fight if there would be a threat in the building.
Thank you, Alex. The door behind you is also an exit, and there's an emergency exit in back, so that's an additional escape route. Thank you for that. On psychological safety, I'm going to focus today on culture of curiosity. We had a really good discussion at the workshop just a few weeks ago, and part of the conversation, we talked about the phrase that we use often here, OPPD, and I love that phrase, and it was highlighted as a positive in the seeking to understand. And there are many concepts we talked about at the table, sometimes very technical topics, and having that culture of curiosity where when we ask questions, it's truly seeking to understand, to have a better understanding, and promoting that culture of curiosity is incredibly important. As my wife often reminds me that what's obvious to me, it's only obvious to me. And so I think having that culture of being willing and able to ask questions and being curious, it's really, really important. Next slide, please. The focus for September, slow is fast, whether we're learning a new task or thinking critically. It's important for us to slow down. We have the practice in our service centers, in our power plants, to always have a safety briefing at the beginning of every job. And that helps us to slow down, pause, focus on safety before we begin our work. We continue to experience a handful of driving incidents each month. As I mentioned before, probably the most dangerous act that we all do on a daily basis is getting behind the wheel. So remember, safe backing practices, a 360 around your vehicle before you start driving it. It's important to aim to prevent an incident regardless of other actions or adverse conditions. And last is countering complacency. Be intentional about safe work practices this month. We emphasize this with all of our crews, with our teammates on job site inspections. It doesn't matter how many times you have been out at the site. It doesn't matter how many times you've driven out of a service center. That complacency is usually one of our biggest enemies, because things may change and we think we know our surroundings when our physical surroundings are changing all the time. That concludes my safety brief.
Great, thank you very much. Our first committee update this morning will be from Director Faulkner from the Governance Committee.
Sure thing. So Governance Committee met on September 14th. And we talked about a lot of things. There were quite a few items on our agenda, all of which we will talk about today. So instead of trying to characterize the conversation, we can just move directly into the first item of claim settlement in excess of $50,000. Mr. Foch.
Morning. As you know, there's a statute, Nebraska State Statute 84-713 that requires a report to Board of Directors for any settlement of any claim in excess of $50,000. And we just wanted to walk through brief. Actually, Lisa Huff, who will be appearing audibly through the speaker this morning, will be joining us to provide a little bit of detail. Is she ready? Erin?
Just a second.
Good morning. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So good morning. My name is Lisa Huff, as Scott has so kindly introduced me. I'm actually here in Phoenix, Arizona, presenting at the APPA conference. So I apologize for my not being there in person. Today, like Scott mentioned, we do have a settlement here that happened at West 32nd Avenue. This is a situation where we were installing some conduit and we were boring. And unfortunately, our bore hit a private water service line and a sewer lateral line. And unfortunately, that resulted in water and mud flowing into 7 residences along 32nd Avenue in Bellevue. And of those homes that were affected, there was one that exceeded the $118,000. As Scott so politely stated there, that we do have that statute that requires us to report to the board any settlement in excess of $50,000. This one home that we're talking about, the 7 that are affected, the reported damages were over 118,000. We were able to settle for 100,000 approximately, and without any admission of liability. We do have all 7 houses completely settled at this point as well, from the same incident. And so each one has been under settlement. The one home is the one that we're reporting on that exceeded the $50,000. All the other homes, the remaining 6 homes, had damages less than $50,000. Any questions or concerns I can answer for anybody in the room?
No, that's it.
Great.
Thank you, Lisa. Enjoy the
Thanks so
conference.
much. Bye now.
Next item is the 2024 board meeting schedule. What we do on an annual basis is present this to the board for review and approval. We do seek for that approval, so this will be an action item every September. The reason we moved it from January to September is it does provide vendors and others signaling well in advance of when they may expect board meeting, and that helps also internally everyone prepare and make sure they understand when we need to be coming to board for decisions. So here it is in front of you. All committee meetings will be planned. We have them planned to be here, and the board committee meetings we plan mostly at 5 o'clock at the Omaha Douglas Civic Center. We are a little bit reliant on their schedule, so the sooner we get the approvals ahead of time, the better. As you see, January 18th, it's a 6 o'clock proposed time because, well, January 18th, they already have a meeting running up until 4:30 or 5 in that very room. So this is why we want to get approvals ahead of time. And then I would also note that there is no meeting planned for July. We're not going to cancel a meeting in July. We're going to have no meeting. And then if a meeting were to need, if the board determined a meeting needed to happen, then that meeting would be convened. Any questions? Thank you.
All right, the next item on our agenda is the SD10 Ethics Monitoring Report. Ms. Purnell.
Hello there, good morning. Jerry Rainey, Director, Employee Relations, will be presenting that report. Here's Jerry.
Thank you, Mikkel. As Mikkel said, my name is Jerry Rainey. I'm the Director of Employee Relations here this morning to give you an update on the SDN, although also known as our Ethics Monitoring Report. Quickly around ethics, one of the things that we look at in ethics is the essential responsibility we have to the public and to ourselves from a matter of public trust and confidence. So what does that look like? It looks two different ways. The OPP director, the board of directors, you have your high ethical standards, and then we have one for the employees. So if you look at the board of directors piece around loyalty, compliance with applicable laws, observance, and ethical standards. You can go to the next slide if you will. As far as loyalty goes, no director should be or appear to be subject to influences, interest, or relationships that conflict with the best interest of the company. Compliance with applicable laws. The company, its directors, and its employees are expected to comply with applicable laws and regulations applicable to the company's activities. And then the observance of ethical standards for the board is in the conduct of their duties. Each director should adhere to high ethical standards. These include honesty and fairness. On the other side, we have the employee piece, which is covered by policy 3.01. That's the Employee Code of Ethics and Business Conduct. OPPD is committed to conducting its operations with integrity and in compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. This policy is actually designed to promote, support, and ensure that employee activities are conducted in a legal and ethical manner. Next slide. So the way that we establish these clear guidelines for ethical standards is set forth by acts which would be incompatible with the best interest of OPPD and the public. So as far as the board of directors, conflict of interest, improper conduct, activities, employees, much the same, but both, what it boils down to is both the board of directors code of conduct and the employee policy 3.01 set forth the types of activities that might be incompatible with the best interest of OPPD and the public. So neither document claims that it can cover all activities that may violate ethical standards, but both outline some specific examples, and those are listed here. The examples for employees are much more numerous, but employees are likely to encounter many more situations, if you will, in the conduct of operations that could lead to code violations than would be members of the board of directors. Next slide. Both of the documents provide a process for reporting and investigating violations, and it also provides this annual report to the board. Members of the board report violations through the chair of the governance committee. And depending on the nature of the conflict, they may need to report to the commission in accordance with Nebraska Revised Statute 49-1499.31, Section 1A. The process for doing that is also outlined in the statute. Employees they may report suspected violations anonymously through Ethics Point, a third-party technology platform that we use, or by filing a complaint with Human Capital. In the past 12 months, there have been no suspected violations have been reported surrounding the board. So no board of director type of violations were reported. There have been 16 reports regarding employees. 15 of those have been investigated and they've been appropriately dispositioned by the company. One is currently under invasion. To give you some reference, in 2018, 18 were reported. So right on pace with 2022. just to give you a flavor of what has been reported, there was one accounting and auditing manner which no violation was found. There was 2 discrimination cases. No violations were found in any case. Improper management practices, there was 1, and that one is pending investigation. An inquiry, nepotism, there was 1, no violation was found. 3, offensive or inappropriate communication, 2 cases of the violation were found, 1, no violation was found. 3 fell into the other category, 1 case of a violation found, 2 cases of no violation found. And then 1 substance abuse, fitness for duty with no violation found, 2 violation of policy, no violation found in either case. And 1 1 was under what we would call violence threat, and the violation was substantiated. So of the total 16 claims, there were no substantiated of the allegation found in 11 of those situations. In 4 situations, there appeared to be a violation and the appropriate and prudent action has been taken. 1 claim is still under investigation. As far as a historical summary, the next slide shows you a chart of where the actual ethics points reports, where we sit over the last 5 years. 2019, you'll see, is really low. We attribute that to COVID. And then the last 4 years have been more along what we have typically seen. And then I've also included a slide to show the historical summary of ethics points reports. So that just gives you the category in which we. And with that all being said, our recommendation for the governance committee has reviewed and accepted this monitoring report. We recommend to the board finds that we are sufficiently in compliance with our policy as intended. Now I'll open it up for any questions.
Go back to the historical summary of ethics points. So I know that we can use ethics point. Allegations can also come through human capital. So would you say that most of the time people are using ethics point as the way to submit some information?
Not necessarily. Ethics point is our platform, so even if we get a report in human capital, we enter it into ethics point for tracking. So what you'll see there is all of the allegations, whether they came through human capital or not, would be included in the ethics point.
So this is not just ethics point reporting. This is a consolidated report of any allegation that has been made and processed.
That would fall into ethics. Correct.
Thank you. It seems to me that this other category here, what I think looks like we're at 9, which is second highest. I would encourage us to be a little bit more granular there, because I'd like to understand what all falls in the other category. If there was only 1 or 2 that were considered other, then maybe it warrants it's a bucket kind of approach, but I am curious, since there are several, that it's all in that bucket.
Yeah, we could get a breakdown of what those others are. I will tell you, experience tells me there are things like foul language, like there are things that people would use ethics point for that probably would be outside of how we would use ethics point in human capital. So, somebody's mad at somebody, whatever, we see a lot of those in I know back in COVID, we seen where people would report people not wearing masks. So that would be a fall into the other. Because it's not specific, but
I appreciate what you're saying, because there's 9 instances. There could be 9 individuals. We're reporting categories where we have 1.
Yeah.
So could we report 9 additional categories with 1, or at least some summary of what are we seeing
What
on
the
the
other
other? So
is.
we'll take that into consideration
call.
for next year. Thank you.
the question.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, how could you help me understand what our process is for investigation? I'm mostly curious about, I assume that's done internally with our own resources, and how do we kind of create firewalls between the accusation and people involved versus those doing the investigation?
Yeah, so I would say it depends. If it involves a VP, involves somebody in human capital, we typically have an external party do the investigation. If it's within the confines of the skill that we have, and like all of the business partners have investigation skills, and they actually write the reports. So anything within the company that is, I would say we determine how much, whatever the allegation is, how much our exposure is from a risk standpoint. And if it appears to be high risk, then we actually have a third party do the investigation.
Okay, thank you.
And they end up with the same reports that, their investigation report has to be as detailed as our own investigation report.
Is it fair to say that third party is usually a law firm?
Yeah.
Typically Fraser Stryker or others. We use a couple of different, depending on the subject.
Got it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Matt.
Are these all internal? Are these like if a customer had an experience, are these numbers accounting for that as well?
They do account for that. I can think of several where customers have seen trucks at home, at somebody's home. And they've reported, hey, it's an ethics violation, when in all actuality, part of their position was to have a truck at home. So, those are, so it does include the external reports as well.
Okay.
They can report ethics point.
And so say that example would be included in the unsubstantiated.
Yeah, and as well as when the reports come from the board of directors, so you get, as a director, you get a report from someone that comes to us as well, and we enter it into ethics for investigation as well.
Thank you.
Oftentimes, the number of allegations is not relevant to the big picture. It's just sustained or substantiated.
Yes, sir. I would actually say you want a number of allegations. It tells us about the atmosphere that we live in, and they're comfortable making the allegations. So it would bother me more if there were zero. Some people would look at that as positive. I would look at that as negative, that we probably were not creating an environment where people were open to report.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you very much. All right, the next item on our agenda is corporate office.
Do the reflections, just.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. Any additional reflections on what's been accomplished or challenges and gaps?
I don't have anything. I just was honoring the process.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think,
Director Baldwin, you noted we included that historical information, and I knew the other was going to be a question, so we will address that.
okay.
We put it in this year with the expectation that we'll delve a little deeper. But I think those things, so just for the board's benefit, we actually had 2 items that's reflected in the report today that did not show up at our committee meeting on Tuesday. Right.
Yeah, the more historical context and the characterization of the claims with those were the requests. So thanks for that. I think that part of this slide is usually also a discussion of whether this SD needs any revisions. And I think at the moment nothing came out of our evaluation during the workshop prep that would indicate that we need to do any adjustments here. So I think we're good to move forward. Thank you. All right, next item on our agenda here is the corporate officer performance review and compensation adjustment. I will pass this to Javier.
Thank you very much. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to be brief. We had an opportunity to discuss this in closed session. We have 9 vice presidents, members of the ELT, who are for consideration on salary adjustments. We have 10 members of the ELT. There's one missing person in that list, and that is Cliff Fleener. He joined OPPD in April of this year. The performance evaluation cycle is as of June, so there wasn't enough runtime for Mr. Fleener to do his job. He was just getting acquainted with his team by then. So what you're seeing here is are all the vice presidents who have been on the job for over a year. The last time we did this review was June of last year. Most of the people you see here in front of you got salary adjustments in June of last year, with a few exceptions who did a little bit even before June of last year. There were a couple of items that I want to note here. One is a market adjustment. So Human Capital conducted a study. We contracted with Lockton, and they did a study with benchmarking peers. And that included a lot of different groups: peers on public power, peers of similar size utilities, peers that also have that are investor-owned utilities, fully understanding our limitations in terms of making payments, and that we can't really do bonus payments or stock options like some private utilities have. So Lockton helped us understand where are we competitively with regards to the competition outside. With that, based on that study, there were 4 recommendations for us to make market adjustments, and you can see those on the table on the right. There are 4 positions that were recommended by our consultant to have adjustments from a market perspective, and those were the Vice President of Human Capital, Systems Transformation, Chief Financial Officer, and Chief Operating Officer. 4% for all of them except for the Chief Financial Officer position. We're losing a 5% change on market adjustment. We're also moving the midpoint for 3 of those positions to more accurately reflect what the market is paying outside, and so that we know how far off are we from that midpoint. There is one market adjustment where we are not making a midpoint adjustment, and that is for our Systems Transformation Vice President. We believe we have enough evidence that we need to change the market adjustment. We don't have enough data to accurately tell us where the new midpoint should be. This is a position that many utilities are moving towards this model of having transmission, distribution, resource planning all together. But there aren't that many positions similar to these systems transformation. We believe that will be the case in the next few years. So once we have enough evidence, we'll move that midpoint. Another important pillar of this analysis was equity. We got very clear feedback from the board, from our employees, from union leaders, that I think it's healthy for us to have merit increases that somewhat mirror what the rest of the organization is getting. That was very clear to me. And so on average, there were some differences between business units, but on average meets expectations for the rest of the company. For exempt employees was around 3.25%. Above expectations rating was 4.25% on average. Contract employees go through a different process, and those salary increases were negotiated under the MOU. So what I'm talking about here is exempt employees. So what you're seeing here are 6 individuals who met expectations and 3 individuals who I rated above expectations. For those who I rated above expectations, the merit increase is 4.25%. Again, matching what we are seeing with the rest of the company. For the other 6 individuals who met expectations, I want to make sure that I'm very clear. You will see a slight difference from a 3.25% increase to a 3.5% increase. This is something that I was recommended to me by our Total Rewards team, where we are acknowledging that there are 3 individuals who have been enrolled, performing virtually the same type of function for more than a year. Those individuals are already performing and delivering results the way they've been doing for many years. Whereas there are other three individuals who are new to the role, new to or that the role significantly changed and expanded. So those individuals spent some time growing into the role, building their teams, and while they were performing really well, they were also growing into that position. So the recommendation is for the new to the role individuals to have a 3.25% increase, and for the seasoned individuals to have a 3.5% increase. I expect going forward, if this were to be the same roster next year, all these individuals will be now fully into the role. There's no new to the role ramp up period. I'm more than happy to talk about individually any of their accomplishments, but in the spirit of time, maybe we can do this through question and answer, or I don't know how you like me to proceed.
Yeah, we had a closed session discussion where we did talk about individual performance, and I felt like that was germane to a closed session conversation. Is there any particular questions or comments that the board has here for open session? I'll just highlight the effective date, June 4th.
Thank you.
So we were originally scheduled, our regularly scheduled program would have had compensation adjustments be discussed in May, effective in June, but because of other very full committee and all committee agendas, we had tabled this conversation for later this year. But to be I would say, true to our process of an annual update, this gets retroactively applied to June. Any questions or comments? Okay, all right. I think we're okay right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next item is CEO performance review and compensation adjustment. So the recommendation from me as governance committee chairperson and Director Williams as chair of the board is a market change of 5% and a merit change of 3.5%. This is something that we also talked about this morning during closed session with specifics to, the evaluation results and the information that we'll share with Javier during our meeting tomorrow. But in the similar vein to what was just described with regard to market change, the Lockton report definitely demonstrated that the CEO compensation package is well below our industry competitors. And so the market change is a nod to bring that salary in line with what that position really needs to be, so that we can stay competitive and we can maintain and retain our talent here. And then the merit change in a similar vein also reflects you being in this role for more than 1 year. You are you're bringing a lot of skill to the role and executing well. And so this is the committee, the governance committee's recommendation. Are there any comments or questions? Discussion.
Maybe Director Barker, you mentioned the Lockton report for purposes of helping the public understand what that is. Could you just give?
Actually, yeah, so we have a third-party provider that every so many years, is it every 5 years, Mikhail?
Yes.
About every 5 years does a survey of public power as well as investor-owned utilities, looking across our executive leadership roles, and prepares a summary of findings with regard to compensation, total compensation package. So for transparency purposes, OPPD is a salary-only type of company. We don't have bonus structures. We don't have long-term incentive plans. So the numbers you see on the screen here, as well as a couple slides back, is the compensation. But we're in an industry where we're competing with firms that are allowed to offer other compensation tools and structures. And so Lockton tries to evaluate the value of those packages, and we can compare ourselves then accordingly. questions about that? So from that report is where we get our midpoint numbers that we use for comparison purposes going forward. Yeah. All right. No other conversation. I think that completes the governance committee chair report. Oh, go ahead.
Yep, sorry, I do have a logistics question for Steve Bruckner. For Thursday, are the corporate officer and CEO performance approvals a supermajority vote?
They are, yes, that's correct.
Great, thanks for clarification.
And there'll be individual resolutions. Thank you.
Okay, that's the last item on the governance committee. Next we'll move to the finance committee report from Dr. Spurgeon.
Thank you. The finance committee did not have a pre-committee meeting this past month. So we had such a short little agenda and people were otherwise busy leading up to the meeting. So we do have, however, an item that will come up for leave on Thursday. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Sires to
Yeah, I will introduce the topic. So my name is Brad Sire. I'm the Director of Financial Planning Analysis here at OPPD.
Brad.
Yes, sir. Glad to. Thank you. My name is Brad Sire. I'm the Director of Financial Planning Analysis here at OPPD. The action to be reviewed today from the Finance Committee is a revision to the 467 Business Curtailable Rider Series, which is part of our broader demand response program at the district. Like many efforts at the district, this revision has been a collaborative effort between many divisions and departments. With us today virtually is Heather Siebken, Director of Product Development and Marketing, whose team led this effort, and Heather will be taking us through the proposed revisions. Aaron, I believe you've promoted Ms. Siebken, and Heather, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brad. First, I just want to do an audio check since I am remote. Can everybody hear me okay?
Hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. Thank you very much. As Brad mentioned, just start off with such a great collaborative effort and really a good showing of how pricing for some of our programs and the product development team can work together, kind of blending the financial exercise with the customer needs, desires, as well as mixing it in with some of our operational needs. So just start off with it's a wonderful example of some really good teamwork across the district. So today, as we're bringing forward, is some updates to our business curtailable program. 3 different products within that program will be up for a pricing change to bring better incentive for customer acquisition and participation in this product. So we'll walk through just what our problem statement is and why we picked this up, current state, the updates that we'll be asking, and there is a resolution in which you guys will take action on. And actually, I apologize, there won't be a summary of the marketing campaign in this version. So if you want to go ahead and move forward. So problem statement here, and I won't read it. I think that we're all very aware that we are in some unprecedented times in terms of growth within the district. And as we've had plenty of presentations at past board meetings, we've heard about, not only the need to how we handle that growth through generation, but also through some of our demand side management programs. The business curtailable is a demand response program that provides one of our largest impacts to that demand side management program as a whole. So as we were looking, I guess I'll say is a lot of times we look at new product development, what new solutions we can bring to market. But truly some of the best ways to maximize our value and achieve our goals is really to kind of, open the hood at some of our current programs and see where we can garner more participation from our customers. The business curtailable program is one of those. And so as we started through the conversations around near-term resourcing and we kind of started looking around and poking around at the business curtailable and how we could grow the program, We took on a significant effort earlier this year to really push this back out to market and to bring in some more participation, but quickly learned that our current offering as is was a little bit stagnant for our market. And it had some, we'll call opportunities for improvement to improve again that product or that customer acquisition. So while we've got a more enterprise-wide problem statement that we're addressing in terms of the need for demand response, we also had maybe a micro problem statement to explore in terms of some of the product features within the business curtailable program. If you want to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Just to talk a little bit about the current state. And like I said, earlier this year, we launched a growth effort, which really caused us to open up that hood. Our current participation is around 60 megawatts, I guess I would say. We've got about 46 customers that are participating, and we know that there's a growth opportunity as we explored starting this year, about 50 more megawatts of known additional customer generation that exists. There's still some things that aren't known, like air permitting status, and for those that maybe are not quite on the radar as we need them to be, but there is a lot more to explore, and we do think that there's some great opportunities to grow this program and helping people with some of their backup generation to help us as well with the business curtailable opportunity. In our current state, we've got 5 different products that exist under this program, and those are all described here on the slide. For purposes of today, though, we'll really be narrowing in on those top 3, and that's where you're going to see some of the pricing changes proposed. If you want to go ahead and move on to the next slide. All right, so as mentioned, today I'm here just to introduce some changes to this to the program and the particular products that are applicable in order for us to improve the offering for our customers and again see more participation by them. What I'll tell you is that as we kind of started down the project to explore, we saw some roadblocks, and as I mentioned, that our product was maybe a little bit stagnant for the market. In areas of like customer financials and bringing the incentive to them for curtailing, their load and energy in conjunction, oftentimes they're unable to produce their own widgets, right, for their business. We saw that some of the product terms were maybe confusing or unclear. They caused unnecessary fear regarding the usage of the program. We also ran against roadblocks on environmental commitments that not only are we supportive of, but these enterprises have their own goals and commitments that they've made to their customers in the community, and how that can, again, maybe interfere with usage of this program. I will just mention that there was some internal resourcing things that we had to look at as well to make the administrative side of running this program a little bit more easier to navigate for some of our employees as well. So through that, the updates, the team explored close to about 20 different potential updates, product feature changes, design changes, pricing changes that they could make to the program. However, there's only a handful that we're going to be moving forward at this time. And what I want to say is, again, this is a great example of product development working in action, where we're not necessarily waiting for us to be able to take action on all 15 to 20 of those attributes, but rather moving forward in incremental fashion to get wins when we can get the wins, and move forward later and continue to increment in that development and bring different features to market. Some of those, like I said, of those 15 to 20 that they explored, biggest reason why some of those are not being explored at this time, and you've heard of this in other near-term resourcing presentations, is that the supply adequacy working group is, as you know, making some decisions around how to accredit the value of some of the demand response programs in the market, and that can have a significant impact. So what we don't want to do is bring things to market that we potentially advise our customers, give them new training, have them sign new contracts with us, and then within weeks, maybe months later, have to pull that back to make revisions in order for us to adhere to some of those new policies. So these were kind of our easy win or no fail opportunities that will have a large impact to our customers. things around, just giving them more notification. Reducing the threshold to allow more companies to participate than were allowed before. Even just small, what I'll call smaller items, but again, really large impact, just providing some definitions and clarifications. I mean, the fact that the holiday schedule was really unclear to our customers in its current state, again, it allowed some of them to be a little apprehensive around participation in the future. And lastly, just that marketing support and what we can do to help them understand how the product works, the value that it brings to the community, to them as a business, and just some of those materials also to help our internal staff and explaining it and supporting our customers through the process of contracting to participate in the program, all the way through supporting them maybe during an event. So with all that being said, the one item that requires your action and why we're here today is the customer incentive. And this is the price of the program. And again, this comes by way of a board resolution, since it is an impact to the rate of specifically rate riders or rate schedules 467, 467H, and 467L. You want to go ahead and move to the next slide. So it's been, I know, uploaded into Diligent, and you've had the opportunity, hopefully, to take a look at the resolution and what we are, asking of you guys to take action and board vote on. Most specifically, what we've realized around the pricing is that we needed to increase the incentive to help offset some of the expenses that our customers are experiencing. Again, by maybe, stopping the manufacturing or turning off the widget making for their businesses in order for it to be financially viable for them to want to participate. Through that analysis, again, we know that it's also still very financially viable to the district, which allows us to curtail when necessary, again, helping with some of that near-term resourcing. All right, with that, if you want to go to the next slide, I believe this is the end of the very brief presentation that we have for you today. I do have some friends in the audience, both Matt Taylor, the product manager, and Tim Linnell, our manager of pricing and rates, are available, who will have a lot more expertise and knowledge of detailed questions of what's happening in the market and anything around the pricing. But we will open it up now for any of you that have questions or comments.
If I may just thank you, Heather, for that presentation. This is very closely tied to last month's decision on near-term resourcing. We talked about demand response. Now, this is one of the tools, one of the many tools that they already exist. The proposal here is to modernize the rate, make sure that we have the right incentives for customers to help when we need their help, and to accurately and appropriately compensate them and incentivize customers to do what Heather just explained. It's not the only demand response program we're looking into, but certainly one that has existed for years, and we want to make sure that we look into and we take advantage of willing customers who have actually, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this on Thursday at the President's Report, when we establish a new peak load late in August. And we had many of these customers participate. We understand that there would be more customers who are interested in participating, and I think that this modernization will help make those decisions for some of our customers. I just wanted to tie that back to resource adequacy. That's very important.
Just have a clarifying question. On the current state, it says that 46 customers participate. Is that currently we have 46 customers that are participating, giving us 60 megawatts of curtailment? So that's current state. Then we could get an additional 50 megawatts with this new, is that
eventually
correct?
Over time.
The potential is an additional 50 megawatts out there that could be if they participate in this.
Probably add just a bit of clarity, and I'll look for support from the team. What we've identified, Director Mohawk, there's about 50 megawatts of customers with generation out there.
Okay.
That assumption would assume 100% participation of those remaining customers, which is probably not realistic. That said, this enhancement, we do believe, will get us a chunk step, if you will, toward the 32 megawatts of additional demand response that Javier talked about. And those customers that we know have backup generation, our account executives and senior account executives have been talking with, in particular, about our 467L program. So we've talked with them both to gain input about what they need for participation, combines with what our costs are around participation. Those will be the very first customers we'll go talk to.
And can you talk a little bit about those customers who don't have backup generation, who may consider having?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Matt, the product manager, who is very close to this, to talk a little bit about that, if you would, Matt.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear the question. Can you
And you can come forward if you want, Matt, or?
Yeah, sorry.
So Matt, the question quickly, just maybe a quick comment on, for those customers who don't have currently on-site generation, how the feedback we've gotten from them on how this modernization of the rate would help them make decisions to perhaps acquire backup generation that will then enable them to participate in the program.
Yeah, so some of the main feedback we got were kind of like what the slideshow presented on. Two biggest ones are the notification and the incentive that, you know, and ranking at number one, number two, the customer priorities. So we kind of made those a focus, and that was what was in there. So increasing that incentive substantially, as well as providing that increased notification, allows customers to make those decisions, you know, get a better ROI, I guess I'll say, on their generation or installing generation, and help offset those costs.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I can't talk specifically about a specific customer, but I've had a couple of conversations with CEOs of some of these customers we're talking about who are very interested in building in redundant on-site generation. And, you know, these type of this modernization of the rate would be advantageous and would help them make those decisions and recruit more customers helping us out on this rate 467.
Javier, if I may, just to help answer that question as well that you've provided. Well, you know, there is some of the features that we're making. There's other features, again, that we're, like I said, an incremental improvement. While I probably glossed over it, you know, when you think about the marketing efforts here and what you're talking about, like getting people interested in this and maybe even wanting to invest in their own, you know, on-site generation, is still an opportunity that's out there. And so, Director Molhoff, I go back to your question. Yes, you had that correct. You know, this is, again, what we know, you know, that there's approximately 50 megawatts out there. However, we also know that there's an opportunity to even grow that market, right? And so while maybe not come by way uniquely of this particular product and program, there could be different products and programs that supplement this in order to grow that market and then piggyback on having the business curtailable opportunity that's additionally available for us then to curtail on that, right? So it's a bit of a twofold, I guess is what I'll say, in order for us to see a lot of growth, but this will at least get us some growth with our existing state and those customers that we know have the backup generation available to them. I hope that helps provide some clarifications.
So for clarity on 467, this is not a demand reduction curtailment program. This is a behind the meter generation program.
So Matt, clarify 467 and 467H. 467L is designed for customers who have their own backup generation. 467 and 467H would not require.
Correct. 467L is the customers that have the backup generation, and 467 and 467H are those the customers that choose to curtail, you know, shut their widget making off or whatever.
Great, appreciate that. So on the backup generation, what types of resources are eligible to participate there? Is that specified in the rate, or is that open to a technological discussion at the time of a customer choosing to participate?
It would, most of our customers are currently diesel. There's a handful of customers that are on natural gas. It is not limited, I guess I'll say, to generation type. So you just have to meet the rate requirements.
Yeah, I'll skip to the end here. Are batteries eligible, or is there a time constraint for participation in the behind the meter generation type of resource?
The time constraint aspect is the asset needs to be able to jail a minimum of 4 hours, and then a maximum of 10 hours.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that batteries would be eligible as a behind the meter generation under the L rate.
As long as they're 4-hour batteries.
4 hour, yes, sorry, with that technical specification in mind. And then I guess, do you mind, and this is without any specific information about any specific customer, do we have anyone currently participating with an energy storage resource under that rate structure?
Nothing.
But they would be eligible to participate if they chose based on the technical analysis and communication with our team, meeting those guidelines.
Just for clarity, we're not restricting a particular type of generation resource in L. It's whether or not they can meet the program parameters, which are designed to provide the system relief we need when those situations occur.
Great, appreciate the clarification. Thanks.
Talk to me a little bit about the notification. I see here in the document, the notice of curtailment period will be by email, a secondary maybe by telephone. At what point do we think that this will be more of an automated type of system? Are we successful with email communication?
Yeah, I'll give a response and you can back me up here. We tend to be talking about some of our larger customers that are not going to take this sort of step typically just off of an email. So this, most of these customers we're talking about are very high touch customers. So in virtually all cases, our senior account executives and account executives are reaching out to these customers specifically, providing not only the notification that we're going to call this program with as much notice as we can, but usually they're looking for some context, some system context around the requirement. Going forward, and when we think about our broader programs that are affecting far more customers like Cool Smart and things like that, not these sorts of programs, those, of course, a personal interaction isn't possible because of the scale, and we're looking to continue to make those more and more automated. There are probably some technology upgrades we would need to invest in over time to be able to do that more effectively, but that's directionally on those programs that affect far more customers, the direction we're headed, not only to be able to communicate effectively with the customers, but frankly, to make sure we get the adherence and the participation that we need when it comes to system planning.
Responses have been, these customers show up. His team does a great job. They work with our operations team, but participation is really the space. And after the fact, the customer then goes back and validates what happened and did things show up as we expected. And it's pretty much always the case within maybe a megawatt or two.
Yeah.
But customers really show up quite well. So we use them for a lot.
So from an operational side, it's a phone call. It's an email is the documentation.
Sure.
To echo Troy's point, our most recent late August heat wave, those customer programs, some of these that we talked about in particular, the L, when called upon, performed within low to mid single digit percentages of where we expected them to in terms of curtailment. So very, very good compliance. Not only because, frankly, it's a little bit of credit to our customers and credit a little bit of that Midwestern spirit. We're in this together. It was not only because of the contracts they had signed in compliance, but to the point about the interaction between our account executives and senior account executives and their requests for situational awareness. Many were like, we're going to make sure we do it just to help the cause, so to speak.
Can you tell me the 467 or 496 per kilowatt, how does that compare to our net metering rate?
I can talk to either Tim or Matt for that. At your discretion, Brad.
Yeah. Tim, would you please give us an update?
Yeah, so the payment with respect to the curtailment offering
Is tied on a dollars per kW basis, and our net metering rate that you receive the retail rate for anything that you don't push back up, and anything you push back on the grid, then you have that incentive as well. And so, you know, quite a different, they're just different valuations, they're different ways of utilizing those offerings. So the really what these customers bring us is that resource adequacy, and that is tied to the capacity or how much they bring off the system. So that's that dollar per kW charge.
I would add, I think this is clearly where we're going, where the evolution of rates and AMI is taking us. Is really to differentiate the value that kilowatt hours provide to the system. This is something that we currently don't necessarily do on net metering. However, I think as Director Bogner was alluding to earlier on how do we get a lot more people and notify more automatically. This is where an evolved and modernized net metering offering would give us that ability to incentivize customers for distributed energy resources and energy storage to deploy when we need it the most and get that value when we need it the most, and be able to differentiate that versus, you know, having that net metering of putting energy back into the system when the value of that would be different. Right? Today, we don't have that offering, but I think it's something that we're moving towards, and it's part of that our AMI ecosystem that will allow us to incentivize a lot more. And I think that excites me because we have 400,000 customers, 360,000 residential customers. Good participate in an offering like this once we have a technology that allows us to deploy.
Denise, did that cover everything for you?
It does. Net metering is based on costs. This is based on a different set of costs.
Based on value, right? The value they provide.
And net metering is avoided costs, not value. Okay, that does, okay.
You know, I might add that's your question. The true answer to the question is probably far more in depth. I do think it's worth noting though that the system, the situational aspects of the system, those are quite different, which drives very different values. At a whole, is it demand avoidance? You know, could you lump it under that tent? We certainly could, but the system situations are vastly different too.
I think it might be comparable if like someone's on rate 232 as a large demand general service and have opted into this rider. If I understand that's how it works together, they're being billed $11.65 per kW on a monthly basis. And so this is what, 45% of that value, which would be probably pretty commensurate with net metering rate when you look at the percentage of like them. So I think that they're comparable. They're not the same numbers, so just for that context.
Thank you, appreciate that.
So for some clarity on 467L, there is, and I know this isn't on the slides, but it is in our presentation here, the changes. 467L includes a capacity credit change, and then there's also an energy credit, correct? On the energy credit, I see 3 numbers and a couple different colors. I see 16, 25, and 9. So it was, what was the number on the energy credit on 467L?
It was 16 and it's being revised to 25.
Okay, and then the 9 is just some other stray information that was thrown on there and struck out. Okay, 16 going to 25. I guess I just want to make sure I'm clear there. Okay, thank you. Great. Yep, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you for including the Brown letter. They noted in the findings about the Southwest Power Pool Development Guidance on Demand Resource Programs and Accreditation. I know that that's still a work in progress, but is there anything that we sort of think about, expect, foresee, or do we feel like this, I assume that we feel like this is pretty well aligned with the direction we're going because we're involved in those conversations. Yes?
So as Heather mentioned, and Heather, please feel free to jump in. Part of the reasoning for the proposals that were brought forward today is they felt more like no regret type of actions, to where while we're still, waiting to understand what will come from SPP, that's when further options would be evaluated and pursued. Heather, again, please correct me where I was off with that response.
I have nothing to correct. I mean, we honestly feel that absolutely nothing, none of the revisions made here, especially around the pricing component, are going to be something that comes out of that working group policy. It's more around the accreditation, maybe how many hours it needs to run, how often we run it, things like that. But these are very much no regret actions that we can take forward, that have high impact for that product, again, acquisition, and really less risk for possible change in the future.
Thank you.
We have a lot of people involved in this stakeholder process at SPP who continues to bring information back to us. And I think we're staying in line. There's a long ways to go before we have clarity in a lot of places. It's not just an SPP. This is a national topic of what should this look like? How firm should it be? What type of duration needs to be there? Similar conversations that we have internally, we added some flexibility here with notification times. From an operational standpoint, I don't want to add notification extensions because I don't always know 4 hours ahead I'm going to need something on the grid. So we're trying to balance this. How do we make something really palatable for our customers, but also how do we make sure we have the ability to operate the grid when it's needed? These are great for peak shaving, but we've also seen values where we have, I'm going to say, localized congestion on a circuit, that as soon as these things are executed, that localized concern kind of goes away. So there's values from an electron flow standpoint as well as peak curtailment. So we definitely want to incentivize more activity in this.
So on that note, I view this more as an operational benefit. Is there a accreditation benefit that this provides us? Is there value that's provided here from an accreditation?
So as this increases, that if you don't have it, you have to add generation.
Okay, so we can count this towards accreditation. Okay.
So some of it's seen as a load reducer, which is the same thing.
That is yet to be determined. So we are counting on these, whether we're counting it on the load reduction side or as a resource. SPP is in the middle of making changes there, but I think either way, it's providing us value. I would say the accreditation route will provide us with more value that's directly comparable to the resource adequacy challenge we have in front of us. Eventually, some of these customers, we may be able to turn them into an accredited from the supply side. But
the value is about the same. So whether you say, hey, I have lower load or I have more generation, I mean, there's some small intricacies there, but the point is, it's valuable for us from an operational standpoint to have this curtailment options in our tool belt.
Thank you.
So we talked briefly earlier about the numeric amount of demand reduction from the near-term generation recommendation, and we anticipate reporting back to Systems Committee. Is this one of the things that would be reported back on a basis of some frequency in the future about policy change here leads to X new participants and then is reported back? Because we said we have 50 megawatts now, 60 now. We anticipate up to 50 as potential in the future. So is this something that would be reported as we make a change in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, we check back and say, did we get more to our participation? And how does that go toward the metric that we anticipate reporting on near-term generation in the future?
So it's a yes and sort of. So yes, we anticipate on reporting on this. The sort of part is the 50 I would quantify again as a full 100% penetration of those we've identified, which is practically, I'll say, unlikely to be generous. That said, we do anticipate over 10 megawatts that we targeted that we believe that customers have expressed interest in from this change alone. Maybe on the high side of that, maybe on the low, but around 10, maybe a little bit greater if we get significant adoption of those that have expressed interest based on these changes. So it won't get us all the way there, Director Williams, but to my point earlier, this will be a chunk step toward our commitment in near-term generation.
Yeah, sorry.
Add that to the glossary of terms.
Chunk step.
Sorry, I wasn't as focused on the 50. I regret mentioning it even, but I guess the question was mostly of this is reporting toward the objective that we're talking about. This would be a piece of future reporting. And so in the systems committee, we would want to flag that this is an anticipated future report type of item, along with other program participation, Cool Smart, et cetera. Smart
The
Living.
team reports yearly anyway, if there needs to be more frequent.
Well, but I think under the construct of SD9, so the new SD9, this certainly will be part of that.
Yeah, great. Just clarifying that, expected future reporting cycle associated with the SD9 policy change. That's all right. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Will this have any impact on customer classes?
These specific changes themselves, no, these changes, man, are isolated to 467, 467H, and 467L. The specific change, the board's being asked to take action on this month.
Right, I understand that, but I guess, does it have the potential to impact like future rate raises for other customer classes?
I don't.
Is that, we're changing the amount that we're bringing in, right? The revenue from these customer classes. So would it be impactful overall to what the total budget is? Negatively to other.
Director
Does that make
Gore,
sense?
yes, your question makes sense. And I think in this case, it's helping us obviate the need for more generation. So it's helping us augment the portfolio of new resources we're bringing in. It is part of the portfolio. So you think about this additional 10 megawatts. If we don't get 10 megawatts from these, it's additional 10 megawatts we would have to get somewhere else. So it does affect the financial picture as a whole, but I wouldn't say that this particular rate change is going to be detrimental to other rate changes. In fact, it helps us address our resource adequacy faster than if we didn't have that.
Okay. Does it help? Yes.
It's less expensive than
Thank you.
building new stuff.
Right.
So
Yeah,
that's
that's
the way to think about it.
Thank you.
It can be a lot quicker.
So question, SD4 kind of question. If we're asking our customers to run generation that is fuel oil, are we taking, then do we have to take responsibility for those emissions? And will that be added to our reporting on overall emissions for the utility? Because we're asking them to fire up these generation assets. Do we account for that in our reporting on emissions for the?
We don't currently count that towards our emissions, our scope 3.
It tiny, but I think that's something that
We'd have to look at, of course, it's intermittent. We'd have to look at that obviously. So we'll be evaluating that as we look into those.
Yeah. Maybe tying into this program, but I do feel like it's a worthy discussion because larger resources that might be considered for operation have a similar consideration. So I do think it's an item, potential additional discussion in the future, maybe through systems.
Agreed. I'll say though, firing up generation assets is not the only way customers can get here. Okay, it doesn't have to require a full shutdown of their facilities in order to get to that. So I think that it's on our customers to put in programs that they can implement when they get the call. So, so those that have their own sustainability goals will probably seek other avenues to be able to take advantage of this curtailment, participate in the program without having to fire up generation, which I think is why you were asking about battery in particular. I'm thinking about even just building operations, setting back temperatures, slowing fan speeds. There's a variety of ways that customers can participate here.
And it brings back the concept of mandatory or voluntary. That's very important. That's why we're counting on these as load reduction programs, because it is possible, and we do have some customers who are very attuned to emissions, who may not want to, who may be willing to bypass the additional incentive because the disincentive created from their own greenhouse gas reduction policies is much bigger. So we're always working with them and trying to figure out, okay, when is the time when we absolutely need you to turn on your generators versus, well, you may be willing to not participate in the program because of your corporate goals. So that's very important.
Yeah, and I think to Janice's point, if we are taking responsibility for Scope 3 for emissions rather than them taking responsibility for operations of those facilities, that's very different, and it might have a different outcome for them. And with that, I would say this is moving pretty far from the rate structure change.
It is, but
yeah,
I would say
second and third order effect.
agreed, but I mean, but this feels like a strong overlap between Finance Committee, Customer Committee, and then also Systems Committee. And so perhaps we should flag it as an additional item for discussion about how specifically this stuff would go in the future, and move it to one of those discussions separate from the rate structure change that we're seeing right now, because I do think there is a lot of connection to other things we have talked about, but probably not as well connected to the red line changes to the rate structure that we're considering right now. And so I guess, does that feel like systems as an item, a place to schedule at some point in the future some additional discussion so the directors could ask questions, receive clarification, and understand where this is going?
Yeah, it feels like systems. I guess I personally would appreciate more clarity on what the itch is that we're trying to scratch, but we don't necessarily need to do that.
Agreed. And I feel like there's just been a number of questions from several of us, including myself, that are aside of the rate structure change. And so we should probably find a way to have that discussion, or, submit those questions for additional clarity in the future, but it's not related to the rate change that we're talking about.
Yep.
Okay.
So just to add that we spent a lot of time talking about generation. By modernizing this rate, adding more flexibility to the strike time, that allows businesses to more easily do things internally. So if I think about a manufacturer who has a shift of people coming in, you give them more time, they can halt that shift from coming in, they can move them to later in the day. There's some things that they can do that makes this more appealing by the changes that the group is making. So that piece is harder to quantify, because I know if a person has a generator, I know exactly how many megawatts they have. The load reduction piece is something that there's more conversations that have to take place, understanding what is possible behind the scenes. And I think this is a nice step to start to open that up and making it more exciting for those folks to participate in, because the payment is better than it used to be.
And I really appreciate the work. This is moving our rate structures in the right direction. I feel like we're, like you said, modernizing our approach, and whatever we can do to minimize the amount of investment the utility has to make in generation. I think this is a step towards that, and I appreciate the work everybody did. I just had a couple of clarifying questions, so appreciate all the work.
Yeah, Echo, my questions should not reflect a dissatisfaction with anything here. I agree and appreciate the rate change, and then additional discussion in the future.
But there are no more questions. Let me just circle this back a little bit. Last month, we received the final report of the rate design plan, phase 1. And when that happens, it's usually every 2 years sort of thing, but that did indicate when we need to, or when we can make changes in rate structures in between that are beneficial, we're going to do that. And so this is an indication of that, I think, which really appreciate that. And it answers another SD9's requirements. Isn't it interesting how all interrelated is? So anyway, thank you for all your questions, and thank you for your report, Mr. Sire, and all your helpers. Back to you.
Great. So that's the conclusion of the Finance Committee. Next on the agenda is the Customer and Public Engagement Committee. Director Howard is not here, but I have spoken with her, and there are a couple things. One, the committee did not have a pre-meeting this month. And then two, let's see, there are no items that are currently on the agenda for this today. But I would highlight that directors have been in communication with executives and staff about a number of items that are reflected in this committee on a regular basis. and that we have continued to receive updates, the biweekly email updates about ongoing programs in this area. So it's nothing is nothing is happening in this committee right now. Quite the opposite. It's just that there was no pre-meeting and there are no agenda items today. And so we don't have any additional discussion or action items here. And I guess I'll pass it to either Tim or Lisa. Do you have anything else to contribute now, or does that summarize things from your meetings, discussions in the past?
That's a good summary and nothing to add.
Nothing to add.
Great, thank you, because I am not on that committee, so I'm conveying information on behalf of others, and I appreciate the validation there. Okay, with that, I think we'll now take a break for lunch at 11:30, and we'll plan to come back at 12:10 and come back for the systems meeting. So with that, thanks very much. Ahoy, mateys. All of you, welcome back aboard the September 19th OPPD committee meeting. We set sail this afternoon for the fabled shores of the Systems Committee. Director Booty, take us out.
Wow. Awesome.
It's not like a pirate.
I warned you.
You did warn me. I wasn't expecting quite that. Okay, on that note, let's start with the chair's report. We met actually quite recently, September 14th. You see the agenda in front of you. We will discuss all of those things except a couple that I'll talk to here right now. Moment. First, near-term generation strategic partners. So we discussed that in Systems Committee, and then as all of you know, colleagues know, we also got an update on that progress in closed session today. For the public, just kind of the quick version of what we're working on and doing there. The district is working towards a relationship with a third party to help us with all of the massive work that we have in front of us, as was approved through that near-term generation resolution last month. So we did it in closed session because we're still in negotiations, talking through some sensitive information about what that relationship can and should look like. And we expect that once that contract is signed and we've got a path forward, that will be reported back to the public. So that's what we did in closed session. Let's see, other update is number 5 on the list for everyone looking at the agenda. Mr. McCormick provided the Systems Committee with a quick update on our progress towards the Smart Operations Center and the development of that resource for the district, something super, super important to us. Again, sensitive information, and the board, you all will have an opportunity to meet directly with the team that's putting that together coming soon. So you'll get a lot more information. This was just kind of a brief update that the Systems Committee received on where that progress is and what some of the next steps are. So much, much more to come for us as board members on that project. Otherwise, all the other items, the 6 through 8 are basic business items. We'll get a lot of number 6 here coming up with Mr. Bai, and then the other items we're going to have in a moment. So let's go on to the next one. Aaron, if you could. Acquisition of land rights. Mr. Foch.
Great, thank you. And actually, I will ask Jake Farrell to come up and walk through this particular item. Jake, as you know, is manager of real property and land management and works very closely with our customers in this regard. Take the floor.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing today?
Great.
Thank you, Scott. We're here to talk about 2 projects. Have some expansion in our transmission system. And as a result of that, we need to acquire some easements. So we come to the board prior to easement acquisitions to discuss any pending condemnation that may result in this. So if we can bring up the maps, it'd be best to walk through. So 108th and State area along Blair High Road, we have an existing transmission line that runs, that blue line that runs north-south and then heads east on State Street. It's a double circuit. We're going to take one circuit off of it at this point. We'll run along Blair High Road, tie into a new substation off of State, and then head back in and tie back into the existing line. There's a few easements that would be needed. To kind of orient people, this is MUD's future operations center site. They're looking at that. We've been in discussions with MUD, not expecting any pushback or issues at this project. And then the second line, next, thank you. This is again off State Street as well, but a little farther west off 138th. We have an existing substation here. And this line here, it's our line 34, is being rebuilt. And then we've got a new substation going in off 147th and Bennington Road. And then we're going to remove that blue area and then tie in the new substation, then come back out and head north. Those two, there's about 17 easements that might be needed, and acquisition of these easements will start next month. Questions?
Thanks, Jake. So yeah, real quickly, I think you're good. Thank you. This is aligning with our typical process, which is providing the team with what they need to go out and the work that they need to do in advance. So this will be a board action item on Thursday. Correct. Okay, let's keep going. We are on to SD9 Integrated System Planning Monitoring Report. So quick heads up before you get started, Mr. Underwood, I think one thing that we all just want to acknowledge here is that SD9's been changing and was changed as recently as last month. So the monitoring report, see a reflection of the previous year's worth of work. We've already today had some discussion about what the next monitoring report might include, which is great. But for today, what we're going to get from Mr. Underwood is today's report. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Director Booty. I think Colton Kennedy is going to make his way up here. I was actually not planned to be here. I was out in a community conversation and it concluded a little bit early. So I think I'm a bit of a surprise here today. So Mr. Kennedy has prepared for this. And so if it's okay to the board, go ahead and let him present it. A few brief comments. You know, ever since 2019, we've been having these big system conversations. And I appreciated your comments, Director Booty, around how the board has changed this over time to make sure we're tracking and reporting the right things. And so we are, we feel like we're looking at the right things in the right ways. As we see our load climb and our resources work to come on, we are seeing the implications of that on our system. Colton's going to talk a little bit about that. The system's fully compliant, but we're a little bit more reliant upon those around us at this point in time, and that's what markets are for. And so we feel good about that, but we're excited to advance the efforts of our generation sourcing and construction to make sure that we get that system where we want it, where we've historically had it. And so Colton's going to walk through some of the things that we've been doing. So Colton, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brad. So if we could proceed through the content here. I appreciate the intro and the context. SD9 has been revised recently as August 17th. There were two major revisions in that. We won't be addressing these items in today's update. We're going to be focusing on how it was in place for the majority of the past year. We could proceed to the next slide. I'll start with an overview. There are 4 sub-bullets to SD9. We'll focus on each of those sub-bullets as we move through the content. Let me start with just the overview though. Integrated system planning is the ecosystem of planning processes used to efficiently integrate the transmission system, supply and demand side resources in the increasingly complex distribution system. Through integrated system planning efforts, OPPD will continue to plan for, adapt to, and enable both the needs of our customers and the rapidly transforming electric industry. Successful planning will ensure both a reliable electric system and the resiliency of the system and its components to prepare for, withstand, respond, and adapt to, and quickly recover from routine events. So, planning, there's quite a bit of forward thought as it relates to this, and we'll have some perspective as policy and its development as it relates to these items as we move through the content. Like I said, we'll hit each of these four as we move through. If we could proceed to the next slide. I'll start with a little bit of background around planning reserve margin. Meeting these needs is really reflective of very long-term planning. I think to show where we've been historically, OPPD's always been compliant with regional resource adequacy requirements. Just shows the last 4 years and where we are with the 2023 season. It shows our total amount of resources relative to the requirements. And so for both the summer seasons and the winter seasons, OPPD is continued to maintain a positive margin above the minimum requirements. This is really reflective of planning that wasn't done yesterday. This was reflective of the planning that was occurred, probably 10, 15 years ago. And so the next slides I'm going to have are really going to reflect on how we are planning to ensure this in future years as well.
And so is paper capacity contracts included in here?
Yes, they are. This is maybe just to describe the metric a little bit more. Our planning reserve margin is the ratio of all of our generation and capacity resources relative to our planning peak demand. And so when you see these green numbers in excess, it means that we have more resources, more capacity, both our physical resources and our contracted capacity than our 50th percentile projected peak demand. And so I think as we talk through this, the next slides, one thing that we are seeing, we said the requirement was 12% over these past 4 years, and then it increased up to 15% in 2023. So the requirement has increased. We anticipate the requirements to continue to increase for resources across the region. And so we'll talk about that as we get to the next slide. We move to the next slide. Thank you. What we're seeing with resource adequacy is the time horizon to be able to plan for compliance of this is continuing to extend. There's 3 factors here I'll point out. I think the board is well aware of each of these. One is load growth. OPPD is currently experiencing unprecedented load growth at a rate of increase that we haven't seen at least since the 70s, or perhaps never. Lead time, second component, it's taking longer and longer to add resources. It takes longer to permit and construct and secure equipment and to be able to interconnect it into the regional system. And so we now see that as 5 to 8 years. And so as we're looking at compliance with the strategic directive, we're not just looking at how we performed over the last 5 years, but how are we set up to perform. The last element here on the horizon is changing regional policy. And so we've talked about load growth a number of times. We've talked about the challenges of adding resources. The other thing that we need to anticipate is how the region's requirements for capacity are changing. And so I mentioned OPPD is expecting an increase in regional reserve requirements. We're also expecting changes to how the region values generation resources and the ability to meet this. And so OPPD is very heavily tied into the direction of this policy and how the region as a whole is planning. And so we're a central part of those conversations. At this point, what we're showing on the right is the same content for load growth and planning reserve margin that was presented in the near-term resource plan earlier this year. But we're expecting the summer reserve margin to at least grow to 16%, and we're expecting a winter reserve margin in excess of 25%. Again, the current requirement is 15% for both. And so we are expecting and planning for changes. And this is part of the long-term focus on meeting the strategic directive. And so the third element of meeting this first bullet, strategic directive, if we can move to the next slide, please, is that OPPD, has created and developed plans over the last year to be able to meet the requirements on a forward basis. And specifically, that's the near-term generation plan or near-term resource plan. We undertook a very comprehensive effort to identify a least cost set of resources that would provide support OPPD's continued reliability, resource adequacy, and resilience in future years. While we optimize for least cost, that portfolio mix of those incremental resources, over 90% of that incremental or new energy will be from renewable and clean sources. And so it really is an attestation to our ability to plan for a robust and reliable system, as well as continue to make progress on other strategic directives around cost and environmental impact of the board's support. Specific resource build is 1,000 to 1,500 megawatts of renewable generation, either wind or solar, approximately 125 megawatts of energy storage at 4-hour duration equivalent, dual fuel combustion turbines, 600 to 950, demand response, minimum of 32 megawatts. As we pursue demand response, and as policy clarifies potential opportunity for more, but that minimum of 32, and then enhancements or augmentations to existing facilities for additional winter accreditation. If we could move forward, please. So those are the elements, those elements I mentioned around meeting our current requirements and projecting to meet future requirements. The second element of the bullets for Strategic Directive 9 is around ensuring compliance with applicable planning related to NERC standards, including consideration of essential reliability services. And so OPPD has historically had and continues to maintain a really strong compliance focus. We have a lot of members or a lot of individuals in the organization focused heavily on the requirements coming out of NERC and what those mean for the utility and our future planning. OPPD has no enforceable violations since the last SD9 update, so we continue to maintain compliance. At the same time, we are augmenting our system. The Castic right now 345 line is one major transmission build that will support our system. There's quite a bit of work there. And lastly, essential reliability services. The team continues to follow NERC standards around essential reliability services and ensure that we have the right mix of resources located in the right place on our system to be able to support things like voltage, system inertia, frequency response. We could move to the next item. Part of the strategic directive is ensuring that we are prepared for extreme weather events, changes to demand side and regional resource, extended periods of low energy production by variable energy resources. So, as we've gone through the last few years, I think folks have experienced what these extreme conditions look like, or perhaps increasing frequency of extreme conditions. And so a lot of the measures that are taken to address these are qualitative. I would say OPPD is involved both at the regional level and at the local level for planning for extreme conditions. At the regional level, we are heavily involved in resource adequacy standards and transmission standards and transmission planning. We're also a central part of developing policy that will ultimately affect OPPD and every other utility, LRE or generator owner within SPP around fuel assurance, accreditation for both conventional and renewable resources. That is quantifying how effective these resources are to the system. Not on this slide, but something I should also mention is we're also involved quite a bit in developing policy for demand response. and how demand response can be valued relative to these regional requirements. Again, how they can contribute to satisfying the overall system need. And so that's also view. I'll move to OPPD's resources. We have made a number of design considerations exceeding minimum requirements around designing our new facilities for extreme conditions. Turtle Creek and Standing Bear Lake, special design considerations for their operation in extreme cold conditions, both with their fuel supply, insulation, heating of those facilities. And so our new facilities, we really are planning on them to be robust and reliable in the most severe conditions possible, or that we expect to experience. Part of this is what we're doing with that 320 megawatts of existing generation and making it more winter capable with the dual fuel capability to be able to mitigate potential risks of the regional natural gas system. And also considering, say, not on the slide, the new pending NERC requirements around winterization around our existing facilities. Yes, sir.
How does that 40 below zero compared to some of our more traditional older plants? Are they comparable or just better? I never thought about that.
Yeah, I would say, and probably others that can jump in here, I would say that it's more explicit in the design criteria. And so also these units, I would say, have fewer systems, and they're newer, so they are designed a little bit more appropriately for the cold temperatures. I think on some of the steam cycle units, the coal units, there's a lot of water processes, and that can really challenge cold weather availability. With these new assets, I think top to bottom, these considerations were made throughout the design. So I think it is probably more of a holistic design.
I think you did it really well. So back to the steam, when it gets really cold, we have to bring in additional heaters, things of that nature to make sure things don't freeze up. The water piece is a pretty big portion of that. These new facilities, we would rather them be built for these temperatures without us having to augment during really cold events. It doesn't mean we won't still do that, but you really want to have them fortified so that you're not reliant on some heater you're plugging in to keep an area warm. And as you think about these other technologies too, a big coal plant, you have space to bring in the heaters. You have a lot less space when it comes to some of these electric programs. We are very excited on the path forward for this. And I'll just go ahead and mention, I think Standing Bear's negative for 40. I think Turtle Creek's negative for 35. I think there was a slight differential. Those are still built much better for cold weather than some of them. And the new assets that we build will look like that also. That's part of our standard. Sure. That we have assets that can run when it's really cold.
Yeah, and a big portion of that is mitigating impacts of the natural gas system. So that is one of the more regionally concerning or regional variables around natural gas availability during extreme cold conditions that we're monitoring and heavily focusing on with our design. So I will move on to the next item unless there's, okay. So this last element, I think, is something that we haven't brought forward before, and that is bringing forward, some quantitative evaluation of the ability of our resource mix to meet our customer energy demands. And so we've computed two different metrics here to quantify that. One is based on our frequency of being able to meet electric demand. And the second metric that we're going to share is a percentage of the total energy total energy that we can serve with our system, with our own resources. So I guess context is, OPPD is part of a larger pool of resources, but at the same time, we want to continue to monitor, how effective are our resources, OPPD's resources, at meeting our needs, knowing how dependent or not we are on the rest of the region. And so these two metrics that we're going to talk through are a reflection of how independent versus dependent we are on this regional balancing authority. So to develop these metrics, OPPD utilizes with augmentation consultants quantitative statistical models that evaluate or simulate risks, sort of a Monte Carlo type way, simulate a large number of risks and different conditions. So weather conditions that impact wind production, impact solar production, the risk of generators, conventional generators being offline because of forced outage. And it does have to come up with, these metrics. Again, I'll point at the first one, the frequency basis. Really, it's looking at sort of a loss of load expectation, but looking at the upside of it. Today, OPPD system has the ability to serve all of our customer demand around 92.05% of the time. And as we look towards 2030 with the near-term generation plan, our own generation mix will be able to satisfy our customer demand about 99.99% of the time. So that 92.05% is not where we would like it to be. I think we talked about in prior resource planning the need for us to get resources online to support our system. I think what you're seeing with 2023 is the fact that those new resources, the Turtle Creek Station and Standing Bear Lake, aren't online yet. And so that poses certain unique local risks for our system as far as if our own resources aren't available and our loads are high. We intend to restore that with the new generation that's coming online and have a higher standard in the long term. As part of the context of the fact that we're in a region, right now there is additional generation capacity within this larger region that helps offset the imperfect nature of our resources. And so this is really balanced at a regional level also.
You want to speak to where you see that going?
Yeah. So right now, across the region's focused on what an acceptable level of resources should be to support liability requirement. Right now, in this last summer season, the region came very close to consuming all of the capacity that it had available. So we've started to see the frequency of not being able to serve load start to increase at the regional level. Future policy is going to address the amount of total resource requirements, increasing the requirements for every entity, load responsible entity, to bring more generation to the table so that the region is more robust going forward.
Sorry, you expect that in the future? Or has the PRM changes from SPP already triggered additional resource planning or procurement from other utilities across our area?
Yes, it's already gone from 12 to 15%. The signal that it will continue to change, I think, has a lot of entities focused on creating their own resource plans. Even though we haven't even gotten to the point, SPP hasn't gotten to the point of establishing what that new policy and new requirements are. I think a lot of entities are anticipating that occurring.
Yeah, so not policy change, but procurement change. So have other adjacent resource that we are connected to followed the SPP policy change by implementing new resource plans or projecting that they will be implementing new resource plans or procuring new resources? Has that direct causation occurred already?
Yeah,
Because
they all have resource plans. I think what we're seeing is we're seeing more pressure on those plans to get more supply resources soon.
To answer your question, yes, other utilities are going to have to build generation. That is becoming a discussion. It's pretty broad in nature. We hear it from EPC firms. We hear it from.
So I guess I'm asking, are we in front of where they are on our new resource procurement relative to, we expect others across Nebraska, South Dakota, South Kansas, adjacent connected utilities now needing to look toward having more accredited and other resources available.
Relative to the size, most that we have 700 megawatts that are going to come on next year with the gas and solar. We were early, and we just need to continue to stay on things to make sure we can continue the pace.
I was going to say, we as an industry, the Nebraska Power Association, just presented the load and capability report at our review board last week. And in that report, we clearly showed, of course, OPPD's load increase, but it wasn't OPPD alone. And I think that is a preamble, I think, to what the question you're asking is, are we leading? And I would say, generally speaking, in Nebraska, we are leading this effort. We already have approval from the board. We're already proceeding with plans, but I expect us to be closely followed by others, as evidenced by the load and capability report that was presented. There's a deficit that we're projecting, and what other utilities decide to do, how they approach this issue, whether they contract with paper capacity or build, it's up to them. But I would expect, at least in the state of Nebraska, for others to follow. And based on my empirical evidence from other CEOs, from other utilities in other adjacent states, they're on the same. I'm seeing the same thing happening down in Evergy, down in Kansas. They're building, and many others will be on the same construction expansion mode.
So we talked earlier about regulatory compliance with metrics from others, but the LOE, maybe there's a better way to say that, pronounce that, or EUE. Those are internal metrics that are not regulatory requirements from external parties. Is that right?
So LOE and EUE are managed at the regional level at this point through regional planning to ensure the region meets those requirements. The historical standard is 1 day in 10 years for loss of load, which relates to about 99.97%, I believe, is what the regional target is. There are no requirements for individual utilities.
Just to supplement, this is what the balancing authorities would use to calculate the PRM. So they use these kinds of things, and what the board has said in discussions with us is we should calculate it for ourselves. And I think in order for the footprint to be strong, all the members need to be strong. And so we're applying some similar logic in our system.
Yeah, and I guess the questions are all pointed in the same direction of defend against potential criticism of overbuilding, right? That's what I'm looking to, if we are in front of others who would probably be following us to build more resources in their own territory, and we are doing metrics, internal analysis on metrics that aren't required for individual utilities, but are done at a regional level. So we are doing that internally, voluntarily, in order to increase the chances of high reliability within our system.
I guess I would augment that in one sense, that it's not necessarily saying you're overbuilding. It's having the right mix of resources to serve your system. So if you can imagine a mix that was entirely wind or entirely solar alone, these metrics wouldn't look like they are. Your research plan wouldn't get to that high level. So I think for us, it's not that you have to be at the same standard. It's how are we taking the right mix so that we're not becoming overly dependent at times when we aren't expecting.
Sorry, I did not mean to suggest that I was saying we're overbuilding. Red team question there of, if we are doing something that is not a strict regulatory requirement, it has implied costs for us, but defend the decisions that we have made. And it sounds like we are in front of where things are going, which is a good thing in my opinion.
There are other utilities that are looking at our 2019 study and saying, I wish we would have done that type of modeling, because that tells us where we need to be much better than what the region has historically signaled. And so at least one of those other entities, Evergy, now has over 6,500 megawatts of new generation they're anticipating with the recent resource.
Side, that's kind of a common word. You hear gold plating, different terms. I think Javier's used some language that I've really connected with, which is we need to build more margin into these systems. And even in the event that you happen to increase the margin, the way the outlook is, it will dissipate. So for those people, and I was getting a smile because I know it's not you, Director Williams, but for those people who might be concerned about that, I would counsel look at the growth profile of our communities in the Midwest. And I think those feelings will mitigate themselves pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I'll clarify that I was pleased to attend an event with Javier where we heard from other utilities, not just in the Midwest, not just in the US, but from Ireland and Germany specifically, who both explicitly said, if you think you're overbuilding, you're probably not. Load growth is moving so fast that if you think you're going to have a bunch of margin, you probably want to keep going because they're going to catch you. That's a summary, and but that I'm glad that we are looking forward and have done the planning work necessary to make sure that we are not falling behind. Thanks.
And it may be important, I think, Colton, you referenced 2019, and I think I would like to give a lot of credit to this board, to the teams who have been working on this. 2019 and 2018, I remember those of you who were on the board having robust discussions on frequency and voltage support. You all remember the concept of the knee curve. I remember that. I remember that vividly. And that, back then we started, issuing the red flags about, hey, something's going to have to be done in order for us to shore up all the capability, not only from a resource perspective, but transmission and voltage. And we're already addressing some of that with Standing Bear Lake Station and Turtle Creek Station, and there's more to come. So it's a long journey. Again, very proud that we took that approach and we've been proactively addressing these issues. Maybe not as fast as one would like, but I think it has been a long journey that we've been on.
Another metric that we haven't talked about is expected unserved energy. This is becoming, this is becoming the new national and international standard for measuring system reliability with highly renewable systems. And so what we're showing here is 1 minus the expected unserved energy. It's showing how much of the energy that you can serve, but it is important that we're monitoring and continue to quantify both these metrics going forward and to prepare that information for awareness for the board. And that is all the technical content that I have for the SD9 update.
If we could go back to the expected unserved energy for a moment, could you put that into more vivid, put it into more vivid terms? Think about our customer owners and how they need to, what's the key takeaway for them as it relates to that?
Yeah. And I'll contrast these. Loss of load expectations, frequency is saying, how often do I get to these situations where I don't have enough resources? Expected unserved energy is saying, how much energy can't I serve? And so, the frequency could be a little bit maybe OPPD is directed to shave 2%, right? Or some small level. But it could be 2% or it could be 20%. The metric is not an indicator of how much. The EUE is a measure of how significant the event is. So again, I'll use this example. The frequency could be, well, you have one winter event. EUE says, is that something that's going to take off 90% of or 50% of your customer demand for a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days? It really measures the severity of the occurrence, not just the frequency of it.
So thank you for that. That's super helpful. Follow-up question then. So when I think about the frequency, I look at the 92, but I know that we've got the full system SPP marker, right, that fills in the gap, so to speak, right? So if we don't have the ability for 8%, there's sort of a backstop that I think, as you described, is also sort of degrading a little bit, but there are plans in place, as we just talked about, to rectify that. So I've got that right. Yes, for frequency, right? is the same true for energy basis, which is to say for the 17, the 0.17, the actual loss? Do I need to think about that number as the OPPD system specific number, or is that?
These are both relative to OPPD's resources.
Yeah,
to
that's what I was trying to get at. Got it.
Yeah. And so, the goal is 100%. Now, practically that can be, there are things that fail. But this is a measure of our system, our resources versus our system. 92% could mean 30 days a year, as an example, you don't have enough resources to serve the load. Of course, we're part of a larger region, is important, but do we want to plan on not being able to do that 30 days a year or not? This provides the board information on just, how dependent versus how dependent our system is on the overall region. And, those events, it's not just a matter of, the capacity coming from someplace. There are certain events and certain instances where it's really important that you do have the right resources locally to support those properties. We talked about, voltage support, essential reliability services on our system. And so it's a measure of the robustness of our own system.
Thank you.
If that.
Yep, you got it. Thank you.
No, I think what is the conversation that is occurring though at the regional level also is what should the standard be? And so, if it's 1 in 10 is the historical, if we get these really extreme conditions in the winter, should the winter requirement be 1 in 10 or should it be 1 in 100? Since the consequences of loss of power are that much more severe. And so this is the type of regional conversation there is. And of course, that goes back to the requirements up at the beginning of the slide around what are entities expected.
It's interesting having conversations nationally about the electrification of our economy. How it is estimated today that about 20% of the energy consumption in the United States comes from electricity, but that share is growing. So to Colton's point, the severity of an outage is not only bigger in terms of megawatts, but it's bigger in terms of segments of the economy that didn't used to rely on electricity. Now you have a lot more heating that is relying on electricity now. So now a lot more lives are depending on that. So I think that is a really good way to look at not only the frequency, but the magnitude and how those two play off each other.
Any more questions? I think our next slide, if we move to the next one, is the recommendation that we. So the recommendation, the management committee has reviewed and accepted this monitoring report for SD9, recommends that the board find OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with the board policy SD9 that was in effect prior to August 17th, 2023.
Thank you, Colton. So that's the system committee's recommendation. Committee members, if you have any additional color to add to that, by all means hop in. Otherwise, any other questions from the rest of the board?
I'll go back just a bit to our discussion of the rates earlier that was probably not related to rates. This does include resources that are both demand side and generation side and demand side, right? They are balanced through the overall resource plan. Okay, I guess, yeah, there's not, the presentation about resources that we saw was under bullet number 1. It's mostly about new generation resources. It did include the minimum of 32 on demand response, but I guess this is why when we talked about it earlier, this is the area where I wanted to make sure we flag and how do we discuss other things that are not new resources, new generation resources, but other types of resources that help us balance to maintain that reliability that we're talking about. And so I guess I just wanted to tie back to, we had a discussion under the rates and finance, but that wasn't probably the right place for that discussion. It's probably here more related to our resource planning. So as we look forward, are we going to have more discussion about the balance of those two types of resources? And I guess I'm not looking for an answer now, but I guess I am just saying this is kind of where that discussion probably should go, rather than under a rate adjustments, have a lengthy discussion about different types of resources. It probably belongs over here more.
Yes, and I want to make sure that we put a finer point on exactly what the board is sort of asking for.
Yeah.
So that we can have clarity around, like, if it's just an educational need where we need to understand something, that's one thing, but if there's sort of a direction that we're wanting to see the district go, like which SD does that fit in? How does it relate to any policies that we have that define our roles? So I think the committee can do some reflection on that discussion and sort of try to identify and define what it is that we're talking about. And then that can help us better understand where it needs to go from there. And whether it's an SD9, SD7, or we'll figure that out. We'll let the form follow the function.
I think on point 6, that has the graph on it, and we could just include a bullet that shows progress towards demand response. I mean, certainly that's a reflection of the SD and the new SD going forward. And so that would be an annual reminder of where we're at with meeting that 32 megawatts of demand response.
That's a certainty that will be certainly included. I think there's something more there based on at least a couple of conversations. So yes, and I think there's more for us to explore a little bit. We'll run it to ground at least, and maybe there's not anything there, but let's run it to ground. Thank you for bringing that up. Colleagues, any other questions? Okay, let's go to the flying away slide. Now we just revised SD9, so let's not lean into changes just yet. But any additional reflections on accomplishments, challenges, or gaps?
A lot has been accomplished with SD9 this year. A lot. So we should say that pretty definitively.
Yeah. I think
a lot of work.
More to come. Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that.
I was on a systems committee, but I would really like to commend the team on this system planning, because as it becomes more complicated, as we can rely less and less on SPP to make up shortfalls, as the economy is electrifying, this work becomes much more complicated, and appreciate all the work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Colton. Much appreciated. It's SD9, and that will be up for approval on Thursday as a monitor report. Let's go on to the next agenda item, the Nuclear Oversight Committee quarterly report. Mr. Bai.
Yes, we have Mr. Euling here to give that presentation. For those of you that don't know Tim,
Seen him in person.
he's our senior director of the decommissioning project, and doing a fantastic job in that particular space. And I think he has some nice colorful pictures to show us today too, which are always fun. Tim?
We do have some colorful pictures. Thanks, Troy. If we go to the next slide, we seem to have lost one there. Should be the monitoring or the actual Word document.
We have it on diligence.
Okay, so I'll just talk to it then. So there's 3 things that are in the Word document. I'm going to start with the NRC part, because we've had a lot of interactions with external stakeholders, and we have several coming up. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission was on site in August. They did their standard review of processes, procedures, observed meetings, look at work in the field. That went really well. They'll be back again in August for a couple other routine inspections, one of which is the security program for our dry fuel storage program. And I bring that up because we don't often talk about that. We talk more about the decommissioning part. But I think it's important to reinforce that the fuel is there. It's monitored 24/7 by our staff to ensure it's safe and secure, and it's still under the auspice of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. On other stakeholder, last week we had the American Nuclear Insurer Group had an inspector on site to make sure that the work we're doing is in alignment with what they would expect to manage that risk and the insurance that they're underwriting for us. Then coming up in October as well, so October is going to be a busy month. We have our decommissioning oversight committee that's on site to really look at things from a project standpoint as opposed to a regulatory or a risk standpoint. And then from a work aspect, that's where the pictures come in. When I was here last, I used this graphic, and I wanted to use it again this time to kind of level set where we expected to be and where we are today. So the first slide shows what the lifting system was that we needed to install to remove the vessel from its installed position. The next slide shows insulation being removed. Third graphic shows the structure that goes around the vessel once it's removed that the torch system basically works with to cut the vessel into segments, which is what the fourth picture is showing. And when I was here last, that's where I expected that we would be today, was that we would be into the segmentation. But we've had some challenges, so we are still on number 3, and I'll talk about those challenges as we go to the next slide. So the slide on the left is the strand jack system, which we had planned to use to lift the vessel up and then manipulate it as we did the work on it. The challenge we ran into is didn't have enough capacity to overcome both the weight of the vessel and the, I'm going to call it resting friction. That may not be a real term, but that's what I'm going to call it.
What's the weight of this?
I'm going to get to that. That's on the slide and back. I knew that'd be coming, but it's about 227 metric tons, so it's big. But to overcome the friction of where the loop piping was installed, we had to try a couple less intrusive items, but we ended up with a second lifting system. And so that's the picture on the right. And instead of lifting from a single point in the center, it lifted from 4 points around the outside of the vessel. So in addition to adding additional capacity, it added different lift points. And using that, we were able to get the vessel lifted up safely. Next slide, which allowed us to start the insulation removal. So all 3 of these pictures show various pieces of the insulation. If we start on the picture on the left here, that yellow thing in the bottom is the remote controlled tool that we use to cut the insulation. At the end of the arm is a circular saw that could be cut horizontally and vertically. So effectively, we did horizontal cuts around the vessel, and there's not room to move the tool, so you had to move the vessel. So for each one of those rings, we had to do a 360-degree spin of the vessel. That's why the single point lift was planned. You can kind of see in the middle picture how we're taking one of those rings apart. And then the picture on the right is one of those segments, and it's metallic mirror insulation. So it's basically stainless steel on the inside and outside and foil in between, all in an effort to reflect heat back into the vessel when it was operating. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with the picture on the right. This is where we are today. The vessel is out. All the insulation has been removed. It's up on a support stand that we installed. The lifting device is removed, so it's just sitting there in that support stand. The structure that goes around the outside of it for the torch is actually installed. It's just not in that picture there. But we would expect to start flame cutting within about the next week. By the time I come back in November, we should be well underway. Wouldn't expect to be done by then, but should be well underway with the segmentation of the vessel. Once that's complete, then the critical path work for the next basically year and a half is removing everything else from inside of containment. If you kind of think back to reactor vessel internals and then reactor vessel, we've been at this for a little over 2 years to get that one component out of containment. Almost everything else that was in containment during operation is still there. We've removed a few things to allow us to have lay down spaces and places to work, but the vast majority of the equipment is still inside containment, and that's what we'll be working on for the next year and a half. From a schedule standpoint, with the challenges that we've had to date, and as we look forward to the rest of containment, we think that's going to take a little longer than our template had. We would expect to get to substantial completion in the third quarter of 2026. From a cost standpoint, we still believe that we're on track with our original estimate. And for this year specifically, we are under budget. Before I go to questions, I just want to touch on the picture on the left. I wanted to include it for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's a really cool picture, but that's our vessel being installed in 1971. So you think back to 60 years ago, the technology those folks were working with gives some additional context to the size of equipment it took to put that thing in place, the ingenuity and the go-get-emness of the folks that designed, built, and ran this plant for 50 plus years. So I just wanted to make sure we did one look back before we continue to look forward. With that, I'll open up the questions. In there is the weight, 227 metric tons.
Tim, is there still radioactive material inside the reactor vessel?
There is nothing inside the reactor vessel. It's just a shell basically at this time, but it itself is radioactive.
Sure. Okay.
Other questions, colleagues?
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for the report, Tim. Very impressive work as always.
Thanks, Tim.
All right, we have another topic here. I have a substitute also. We have Shane Hansen, our manager of transmission, coming up, and I think we have Jake here too, because the two of those are working really closely on the Cass to Sarpy transmission project. And so we'd like to give you an update on that. I'd say things are going pretty well at this point.
Yeah, thank you very much. Shane Hansen, Manager of Transmission Engineering. Project manage all of these with a big cross-collaborative team from our land management, real estate right-of-way team to our public involvement and stakeholder engagement. So Aaron, if you wouldn't mind going to the first slide, please. So you guys probably heard a lot about this Cass to Sarpy transmission line. OPPD received a notice to construct from the Southwest Power Pool in 2022. So we're tasked with building a new 345 kV line from our Cass County station, northwest of Murray, Nebraska, to a substation off 180th and Giles is how that was written. The routing process that we're doing is, as you'll see, all the information goes from Turtle Creek Station to Cass County Station. That was because we had made the decision as part of building Turtle Creek Station's grid interconnectivity to build one of those lines as a double circuit. So that added 3 miles of a double circuit line, or 6 miles of a double circuit line that allowed us to get more infrastructure in those areas without affecting the communities any more than we had to. So the need of this line is really to support that increased load growth. As we talk about near-term resource, as we look at the continued peak load demands that we're having, this line will become more important to those projects. And this is something that our transmission planning team has been looking at and submitting as a project to SPP since 2010. So we've known and have seen this need for a long time now. So Aaron, next slide, please. So really, this is kind of the map of the process that we go through for the routing and public involvement of these transmission facilities. So back in June was really the first round where we went out to our local leaders and started to present this route segment map that you'll see over here. We're bound by state statutes on where and how we can route lines, so half-section lines in existing corridors. So we really went out to the local leaders and then to the community in June and July and asked for feedback, right? What are these lines? What do we need to know about? Any concerns or future development that we need to include in this process? So we took that information from June and July and really been back gathering that data, going through and really refining our results. And now we have just completed our second round of local leader meetings. So we held those last week, both in Sarpy, in Springfield and in Louisville, invited all the local leaders and different agencies to those meetings as a means to have that conversation as we now look forward to our next round of open houses here in October, and then ultimately the route announcement at the December board meeting. It is a good thing to touch on that this is not a requirement by any state statute that we do this process. It is something that we've grown significantly over the last 20 years of really how we route these transmission line, really trying to lean on finding a way to get the public more engaged in these processes. So as we look at where they go, we know we won't make everybody happy, but the intention is to have that level of engagement to really try to find the least intrusive alternative. So Aaron, next slide, please.
Thank you, Shane. And it's not a state requirement, but it is I consider it a board requirement, clearly responding to SE13 stakeholder engagement. That's where these resides, I think.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So really, this is kind of the crux of what we're trying to do. So we look at all the criteria for routing a new transmission line, and we lump them into the 3 categories: the social, engineering, and environmental. So we have lots of industry experts across the team that can look at the engineering and the environmental. We can understand the cost of the design inputs. What we need is that input from the public to help us with the social. What are the specific things in that area that may, that we need to know about to help us with the project? So we hear a lot about that in farmland, stay out of the middle of our fields, maybe go closer to homes, stay on road right-of-ways. And when you get into the residential, it's kind of the opposite. Stay on major corridors away from home. So we try to balance this specific to the areas that we're routing these lines and try to take those feedback to make them, again, try to find the least intrusive option that exists. Next slide, please.
So from our phase one, the local leaders and open house, this is kind of summary of what we see. We had sent out 4,000 letters to invite folks to those public meetings. We also sent reminder postcards to those same 4,000 folks. We advertised in all the local newspapers, including Cass Graham, which is, how a lot of folks in Cass get information these days. We posted flyers in local businesses and shops. And then we continue to advertise using social media, try to find as many ways as possible to get folks to attend these. Ultimately, we did have 100 comments come in through our online mapping tool that allows people to go in and put a place mark down on a GIS map and leave comments. We did have approximately 163 public attendees. Those are who signed in. We're very fortunate that we had several board of directors that did come through those meetings as well. And then ultimately 82 written questionnaires. But the point is we continue to have a lot of avenues for feedback from the public, whether it be online, whether it be in person, phone calls. We have a hotline set up so that way somebody can call in with concerns and a member of the project team, usually from Jake Farrell's right-of-way team, will reach back out to them to try to help better understand their concerns. And then that additional comment and coordination through OPPD Community Connect, we found that as very beneficial, that we can keep the most up-to-date information. We can even take comments and create FAQs around them just to have more information built and available for the public as they attend these. So here, next slide, please. So this is now what was presented to local leaders last week and what will be presented during the public meetings coming up in October. So what we've done is we've taken kind of that segment matrix and we've come up with distinct routes. So we have approximately 5 distinct routes in Sarpy County and 4 in Cass County. And what we attempt to do is we attempt to make them geographically diverse. You will notice obviously that there's still only the one that goes through Louisville. We had intended to reuse an existing transmission crossing that parallels Highway 50. And that was a decision that we made from the environmental perspective. So from a Corps of Engineer permitting process, if you can reuse your existing infrastructure and bolster it, it makes that permitting process and just showcases a better environmental solution. Plus, if you have seen anything along the Platte River down here in the Louisville area, there's not a lot of places that don't have lakefront properties or things like that tied to it. So this was an early decision that we made that did at least create a center point that we knew we were going to cross there. And like I mentioned, we also attempt to make these routes geographically diverse, so that way again, we can start to weight different criteria as we look at those social engineering and environmental constraints for lines like this. There was one new route segment that kind of has some text next to it. We do a lot of things really well here with these things. This was a segment that was somehow overlooked. So when we first announced that we had that green map of all the different segments, we had one little stretch along 84th Street that when the team started to pull the data together, this was a roadside construction with no homes along it. So it was something that we've been very direct with the community. There are 4 property owners along that we have called directly and said, you may have you've seen that there wasn't a segment. There is one now. Please continue to help us get feedback. But again, this was, as we were looking at those corridors, looking for truly what would be the best route, this was the approach we took for that. Next slide, please. So this is the next step. So we talked about coming up here in October, next round of public meetings, one again in Springfield, and that will be at the First United Methodist Church, and then one in Louisville, and that's at the new barn at Lilac Farms, I believe is the name of that. We had to change up locations because previously we used a high school. Turns out Louisville High School is busy this time of year with other high school related activities, so we were flexible. Again, route announcement here, end of the year at the December Board of Directors meeting, and then moving right into the engineering. And still, as you can read here, it's our goal to have this line in service by December 2026. So there's unfortunately a lot of work left to do between now and then, but this is some good steps along the way that we're seeing. So with that, I will open it up to any questions.
Make a quick comment here, and the directors that have been here. SD 13 has really been a hallmark for OPPD. This team, and it's been district wide,
it is best in class, and it is just amazing, the wonderful work that you do and the collaboration and the people that come, and many of the directors that were there got to see just how we interact with the public. And that's what really makes it special. So I just wanted to say thank you to the team, because it's a heavy lift.
The open house, just as it really is an interesting community. See what happens. I was really impressed, very impressed. And it informed me that, I think, Vice President Olson said, you know, people come in and said, oh, you already know where the line's gonna go. Why are you even asking us? And it's apparent to me when you walk through the process, they have no idea where the line should go. They want to know what they should avoid so that they don't have problems in construction along the way and have to take 2 steps back. So this is so important that the public really takes those invitations very seriously and comes and offers what they know about their land and about their neighbor's land, about how the weather works and how the water flows, so that the best route can be chosen. So great work.
Just to clarify, you said something about, so this line will run from Turtle Creek to Cass County. There's no like.
So, yeah, so and there's the clarifier. So the line that we're routing, you'll just see is from Turtle Creek to, excuse me, to Cass County. How the notice to construct from SPP, the actual plan, the line itself will run from Turtle Creek Station all the way up to 180th and Giles, and it'll bypass Turtle Creek Station today. But again, we chose as OPPD to build 6 miles of 345 basically ahead of receiving this notice to construct. And the intention was we were already doing that Sarpy Southwest transmission project to interconnect Turtle Creek Station. So we made, you know, that business decision at that time to, I don't want to come back to these same landowners and try to find another path for another transmission line. Because, you know, we're still out there building that right now. And now here we are already. And we didn't have this notice to construct at that time. So
There's no loop. It's just one line from
correct.
Point to the other
Yep.
point. And
Correct.
it may follow a different path, but there's no loop.
Correct, yeah, and these are all kind of, you know, and the maps are kind of, they're all forward progressing, so there's, you know, 4 distinct paths we would take, but we would never turn south to go back north or anything like that. So for the public, we have maps that have like color coding, so one route is one color, so it shows, it's hard to see in this presentation mode. When you get blown up and on billboards in front of folks, it's a lot more apparent.
We talked about loops on distribution, right?
Right.
I think that's probably where the question came from.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to clarify, it's one straight line, you know, it's one line from one point to the other point. There's no redundancy there.
Yeah, no.
I think there's a public power moment here where we talked a lot about the planning, and it kind of had a resource adequacy feel in SD9. But Dan Lenahan and Danny Bell and the conductor planning side, this is kind of like, we did a little bit of this at risk. We just elected to build something that we knew was going to have to come in the future early. And I think that's kind of a public power moment where it's the right thing to do. We're the stewards. We're going to do it now, whether somebody says something different or not. And I'm not sure that totally, it came out to me, Shane, but I think the elective decision to do that was a really wise one and was consistent with the values that we have as public power of just doing things the right way at the right time. And I kind of just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you for highlighting that. Remind me, this is an SPP initiated project, how the cost gets socialized, both in terms of the one that we did proactively.
Yeah, so Dan Linehan, Director of T&D Planning. The SPP socialization, cost socialization works such that based on the voltage level, which this is at 345 kV or 345,000 volt, 100% of the facility is eligible for socialization. OPPD still pays the upfront capital costs, and the socialization occurs from recovery through a transmission rate over approximately 30 years from other SPP members at our transmission tariff rate of return.
And to Brad's point, we're acting proactively, we're not being punished.
So that scope, yeah,
right?
that scope of line that we have already built is part of what will be included in the reimbursement for this NTC. Yep. Yeah, and we've walked through that clarifications because if you've gone through the Turtle Creek Station, there's a lot of craziness going along with wires in the air. So it's been a lot of communication with Dan's group and our regulatory affairs team to really make sure we understand and have that alignment.
Dan, you check me on this. I'm gonna say it a little differently because I think it's gonna help make the point you wanted to make. SPP gave us a notice to construct and we said it's almost energized. Right? So part of the segment, yeah. So that's kind of how.
I would add though, the team is so ingrained with SPP and modeling and how they look at the future, that there was good collaboration and coordination on when we made the decision to step ahead. So it wasn't just a, hey, we're gonna go, like there was good conversation around that. And that shows the importance of how we engage with SPP to talk about the future, prepare for the future. I think this is a good example of where the team is really shown in that space. And I think there's a lot of respect between our organization and Southwest Power Pool with the way we kind of come together to plan, looking out in the future for items like this.
Okay, that's all really good. Any other questions, comments, colleagues? All right, thank you very much. Well done. Got a bunch, Troy. You ready?
I've got a few today. Kind of interesting. My screen just went.
So before you get started, just for the board, at our committee meeting, we're now at a cadence where these things are coming steadily enough that we don't walk through all of the detail in committee. We wait until now. So this is an example where it's just best and most efficient for us to see all of the same things all at once. So with that, here you go.
Giving us a slight nod that there's several coming.
Yep, that's about it.
Be prepared, spend time ahead of time reading ahead on them. And I think that's working out pretty well. This first item here, substation, foundation, duct lines, and miscellaneous work, lots of labor associated with this particular item. And we'll have a picture here to show up. A new substation near Bennington, energized this in 2024. This is to support distribution level expansion within that area. This is not necessarily for a large customer. And it was one of the same items that Jake had mentioned earlier in his presentation. So just trying to link those together for you. But what this is foundations and bases to support all the structures that will be on site, equipment, including breakers, transformers, buildings, things of that nature, duct system for conduit. For reference, the board has already approved for this. The control building that's on site, the grading, I think earlier this year, around the May time period, maybe is when we saw those come through the board period, through the board for approval. But you've already seen those pieces. This is the next step of it. We saw 3 proposals, which were all legally and technically responsive, which is fantastic these days. 5 years ago may not have been quite so exciting, but it sure is right now when you have things come together in that particular space. After the team ran through their analysis, Midwest Infrastructure was evaluated to be the lowest and best bid. Can you show the picture just so they can see it? We have good experience with Midwest. We've used them before. Their work is good quality. So we have no concerns with their ability to be able to execute this work. It's pretty standard. Our engineer's estimate was pretty much spot on with what we saw for the actual offer in this particular case. So we are asking the board for approval to move forward with this award. I'll open it up to any questions you might have.
Looks like you're good.
All right. Next item. So we have a lot of items here. There are 5 in particular that's really based around our asset management program. We take that very seriously here. I think I've talked to you about how we're trying to mature that program, better data and analytics, databases, understanding the extent of condition of our assets. And what you're going to see is through multiple inspections and trending of asset degradation, that we have some items here that we are putting forward to for the board's consideration. What I will say is what we find in the generation space, because a lot of our generation is kind of unique and specific. It's not always energy delivery side to just go out. Processes. You're going to hear some of that today. On this first particular item, we have Nebraska City 1 Station air preheater baskets, seal replacement. This is a labor contract. Board approved materials in May of 2023 due to the lead times associated with that. Material, for instance, there's a lot of it. So if you were to think of Nebraska City 1, you put all these baskets, it'd be about 1.5 to 2 times the size of this room. So big facility, lots of baskets involved, lots of work. So just kind of put it in perspective. It's not something the size of a bread box. So pretty big. We also had some jokes on that earlier. My kids don't know what bread boxes are. So if I use that term with them, they're like, "What are you talking about, Dad? We don't put bread in boxes." Anyway, and to be upfront in this particular item, and the next couple, you're going to see that we're looking to reject the proposals. We'll go into a little bit more detail, but negotiations really need to take place in this particular space. We have legal counsel here to talk about that if you want to dig into it. As a reminder, this equipment preheats the air for combustion. The generator can't run without it. There are 3 layers of baskets. And to do this work and replacement, it takes about 40 outside services folks to help us with this. If we didn't have other types of work going on at the same time, outages, we may be able to use more of our folks to do that ourselves. But we have additional work executing during outages, so we need outside services to help us. Baskets and seals are at the end of their expected. We look at them, make sure that they're kind of tracking the way they should. That's the particular case we have here. We would expect to complete this during our planned school outage. And we had 2 bids received. Both were determined to be legally not responsive. Special conditions that they were looking for, revised payment terms. Something new for me that I don't think I've seen very often is a clause about recruitment fees. So if we were to hire one of their individuals within the next year, they would be looking for some kind of compensation. I think that's a sign of the times. It's hard to get good qualified people. So that was one of those items that kind of slowed down, which was kind of surprising for me. But those are the kind of things we would walk through a negotiation process. So with that, we're looking to reject the bids and actually negotiate on this one. What'll be interesting, and I'll share this, is the next 2 look very similar. And we think when we go to negotiate, we can probably package some deals, maybe have some efficiencies with that. So we're looking forward to seeing what we can do if the board allows us to do this. With that, I will open it up for questions.
So based on the last comment, Troy, I'm looking at a little bit, the same vendors, at least in the next one, I didn't look all the way ahead yet. And if the answer to this question reveals too much in terms of our having a strong negotiation posture, then that's fine. Only 2 companies, do you anticipate that those are the 2 companies we're likely to have direct conversations with, or is there a bigger one?
Likely stay with those 2 companies. Now, if we were unable to come to an agreement, we might look different, but we feel like we've had enough relationships with them. We feel pretty confident we can work through that.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, any other questions?
So what's the expected life of these preheater baskets? Seems like we've been here before and replaced preheater baskets.
Well, there's lots of baskets and lots of layers.
Maybe on a different unit.
Lots of baskets, lots of layers. There are sections specifically on Nebraska City 1, for instance, that with some of the new emissions technologies that we have to reduce emissions, there's a small segment, like maybe 4% of the baskets that tend to wear a little quicker than the others. But somewhere, 10 years plus is pretty normal for most of the baskets.
Season again, so let's.
We sure don't.
We-
And again, the team takes pride in inspecting and making sure that we're keeping close eye. We want to replace things right before we have to, not too far ahead, but we don't want to get to the stage where that's.
So then the end of life that's mentioned here is about 10 years?
It depends on location. So in this small section that I talked about, it could be a handful of years, but it's very small. It's like 4%. The rest of it, it can be 10 years, it can be 8, it can be 12. It just depends on a lot of different factors and location within the facility itself. This would be considered normal for any power plant of this type. We don't see anything abnormal.
Last question for me. I noticed a pretty big delta between the engineer's estimate and what the bids came in. Anything there that is a concern?
Yeah, what's interesting is if you fast forward to the one we're going to go to here in a minute, they were spot on. I would say when our team looked at it, there were many facets of the bid that were much less than we expected. So as we go through the negotiation, we probably touch base on that differential, but
I'm sure the scope is right.
So 2 contracts, North Omaha 5, which we're going to talk about in a minute, Nebraska City 1, same type of thing. One bid was spot on, the other one was not. So those would be things that we work through in that conversation.
Okay, colleagues, any last questions on this one? Here we go.
All right, do I just say ditto? This particular one's exactly the same.
Highlight the differences. Yep.
There's really not a whole lot of difference in this particular space. Omaha 5 is a lot smaller, so not nearly as many baskets, which is kind of reflected in the price. Same deal, inspections that have taken place, and same type of legally non-responsive responses, same 2 bidders. So nothing really different between this particular contract.
Okay, colleagues.
All right, next item. This is for a valve. This valve is very important for steam flow and things of that nature. It's about 3 foot tall, so it's not a really small valve. It takes a decent sized piece of equipment to move it. This particular item, and again, is a reject and to work forward to negotiate. One thing I'll say is this is original. It's an original valve. It's been there. The team's been working for several years. There's been some complications with the valve. They've rebuilt it. They've worked on it to keep it moving. We're at the space now that that is no longer an option, and we need to put something new in that particular space. This is a contract specifically for the work around it. The valve itself is not that expensive. The board will not see it because it's below the $500,000 mark, quite a bit below it. And so this is really for us to be able to do the work in that particular spring outage of 2024. In this particular case, 3 bids were received, and they were all deemed to be legally non-responsive. Same type of things, request to discuss the provisions more, revised terms, and then recruitment fees again kind of snuck into this one. So looks a lot like the last 2 that we just spoke about in this particular space.
So is this not work that our staff would be able to do, steam fitters?
So it's a volume thing. So when we plan outages, we look at every piece of equipment and item that we need to be able to execute the outage. We look at the window that we're allowed to do the outage, the Southwest Power Pool, because they're looking at all generation across the board to make sure. Those windows have tightened. So it used to be you could do work during the winter time. I think you've heard a lot of things from Colton around things that we're seeing in that period. So to be able to take an outage during the winter is really not a possibility now. So those windows get shrunken. So we look at what our folks can do We look at what we can do outside services for, and then we plan accordingly. I can tell you that our folks work a lot of overtime to be able to do what we have. We make sure we utilize them to the fullest. We also have to make sure that they have the ability to get some rest because it's extremely important. And I think the last 2 years have been quite draining on some of our staff, shorter time periods to do more work. As you know, the asset management program, because it's becoming more robust, finding things that we may not have found before, and we're working to execute those to increase the performance of these units. Hopefully it helps. Yes. So the first two, the board's already approved those. And so they've been ordered and they're being manufactured and they'll be on site before the actual execution. Scott, do we have this on site already? For this?
Yes, we do have the valve.
Thank you. I think I saw it sitting on the deck today, but there's more than one valve, so I wasn't sure if that was the one tagged for this or not.
Okay.
Questions?
Alex, any other questions? Okay.
All right, this next item, this is for us to be able to negotiate a contract. We'll go through this again here in just a moment. And modular power systems for distribution control system. And this is, think about hardware to be able to control the generating unit when it's in motion. Pumps, fans, motors, things of that nature. The hardware that we have is original. The systems, the power systems, the power supply systems that are feeding it are all original. They're at the end of their life, they're degraded. We're starting to see issues where these things are starting to fail more frequently. We've been able to limp along and fix them as we go, but now it's time for us to take that next step to replace those. This particular item is a materials and services contract to replace those. Many of the pieces are becoming obsolete, so just think about the hardware you have from your computer. Things that used to last a lot longer too are becoming less functional, and I think what we'll see is some better functionality when we move towards the newer equipment. These are proprietary parts. There's really only one entity that can provide these for this power plant, and that is ABB. So we need to be able to negotiate. When we go out, we usually like to have a lot more options, but in this particular case, there's really one option for us, which makes this kind of unique and probably in the best interest for us to be able to negotiate directly with the counterpart to make sure we can get the best deal that we can for that. So with that, we are asking the board to be able to authorize us to negotiate and enter into a contract for this replacement item. If you're looking for an order of magnitude, you would think between 500,000 and $1 million, roughly ballpark for an item like this.
When do you measure the school basis for it? It's 44 years.
It's been around a few days.
Okay. Questions?
All right, one more. Spare parts and services for Jones Street 2. This is another one where we're looking to have authorization to negotiate. The last significant refurbishment on this unit was in 2000. It's not a new unit. It's been a while. The teams have had borescope outages, inspections in recent years, and we've seen the point that it's time for us to start working through this equipment and replacing some of the important critical items within the unit. It will require full disassembly. We're actually getting pretty good at this. A lot of utilities in the past would outsource all this work, and we still outsource some of it. But like in Cass County, we had our own folks do 2 of these type of events where they took it apart completely, they refurbished it, they put it back together. Lots of pride associated with that. We can't do that with all of our generators, but regardless of the fact of whether we have outside services or not, with some of these they're involved with this the whole time. We want to make sure that we have good knowledge and good skill set building within our own employees. So we're kind of proud of the way we're managing that. Sometimes we still need outside services to help, which would be in this particular case, but our folks will likely still be heavily involved with this particular outage. Complex nature of work. So these are older facilities. There's not just a lot of additional parts laying around. They're kind of specific and unique. Based on the time frame we need, we may need to look at refurbished parts. So part of that negotiation will be new versus refurbished, and what does that look like? And how long does it take to get certain parts? And so that's something the team will be working through pretty readily. And I probably should have stated it different. It will be a combination of OPPD and outside services on this particular project. There's lots of facets. So what we're looking for is an approval of the engineer certificate and then authorization for management to negotiate. There are a small, very small handful of companies that do this work. So it's not just one in this particular case. There's a very small number. And so we'll be working to have discussions with all of those. Just like we did for Jones Street 1, which was a little bit more recent. We've got some work going on very similar to this. So it'll look a lot like that. Any questions, any comments?
With the acquisition of the parts will not be known until the unit is disassembled. So
That's
establishing a contract.
That's pretty normal. So like we do these inspections, right? And we see a good port, like borescopes, we have these ways to go in and kind of see in generality, but really until you take everything off and look at it and visually inspect it, and measure and all that kind of stuff, it's not always obvious. And so anytime we open something up, there's usually some expansion of replacement regardless that we'll have to kind of work through. Some of the flexibility to be able to do that needs to be in that particular case. And that's really important when it comes to like the refurbished parts. Like we can order ahead of time the things we know, but when you start to take things apart, there'll be things that come up that you could not have known without that type of work being performed.
Okay. Any questions on this one? Well done, Troy. Thank you.
Lots of work.
Will all be on the agenda on Thursday for us. That Director Williams, Systems Committee, is complete.
Great, thanks very much. Next, we've got other business versus the confirmation of the board meeting agenda for Thursday. Wow. Yes, it looks like we've got everything scheduled for the consent agenda, consent action items. Do we have anything that we would like to move? That's good. Corporate officers and CEO, move those two. Any of the other numerous items that we've got on there? Pretty good. Okay, sounds like we're in good shape on the board meeting agenda. Next, we've got board work plan. Teeny tiny little letters there, but you've got it in diligent, so you can take a look. We do have updates, so I will encourage everybody to make sure that they've taken a look at this. Do any of the committee chairs have anything that we need to change on the work plan since it has been updated following the governance workshop, which most of that is reflected here now? Okay. And Scott, you and I had talked recently about what I think we called item number 2 and number 9 on this list. Did those get reconciled into a single item on what we're seeing here? I can't remember 100% of what that was.
Item 2 and 9.
Well, I'm saying 2 and 9, but that was where they were in the list at the time. There were 2 things that were going to get combined. They were getting stuck. Well, I'll check back with you on that.
Yes,
to make sure.
I apologize. I'm just not making that connection.
Yeah.
You and I had a conversation.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh.
That's where it is. Something going on here. Sorry. I'm here and I talked about it. There were 2 things that were similar. They were trying to put them together. I think it was going to go to you to talk about. Okay. So we're on that with, okay.
Thank you.
Perfect. So nobody has any changes necessary in the board work plan looking forward.
I'll just note, and this is maybe just a comment to take or leave, but I definitely see, not to name any committee necessarily, there are some things that have been on here since 2020. And so maybe we might benefit from a little tidying up, which might help us prioritize and focus a little bit too.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of this at the governance workshop. That sounds like a Scott action item with maybe me.
So bring those back with intention to the committee especially. And some of them were just put on hold as items that we can revisit, I think, through the course of committee and see if indeed they want to be put on hold, activated, or taken off.
Yeah.
So this is a great opportunity, for example, on this one, on the last item on the previous page, the ad hoc committee on market transformation.
Right.
Right, that we talked about this in 2020. And there's a note saying that SD9 potential revision may address part of this topic. So this is something I think that systems we can disposition of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's, so you said systems, but it's on governance. I just want to make sure if we're going to take that.
Oh, that was in governance, yeah.
Oh, governance.
Yeah, it's on the next page that you were seeing on the screen, but it's the bottom of the page we're all looking at. Yeah.
Discussion and governance about that.
Yeah, I'm wherever the right home
If I may, because I think we can spin down pretty quickly on this. I think the notion is to bring all of these back within each of the committees.
Yeah.
And try to tidy it up. And at that point, we can go line by line and figure out how to pass things between committees as needed.
I'll just pass it back.
It's a hot potato.
Exactly. Bring a hot potato to those meetings, just so we.
Sounds good, but at this point, nothing needs to be added, adjusted, or changed today. Okay. Then we do have additional information presentation today on near-term generation. And there we go.
Good afternoon, Megan Walker, Manager of Construction Management within our Utility Operations Division. Today we have an update on our new natural gas generation facilities, and then Mr. Lang will give an update on our solar projects. Next slide, please. Okay, at our Standing Bear Lake facility, we're approximately just under 71% complete. And our major construction activities include in our substation area, we are finishing up the fence installation around the substation site proper, as well as making connections between the breakers and their associated switches. If you look at the bottom right-hand photo, you'll see a recent photo of our substation progress. The transmission, on the transmission side of things, you might have seen some activity around there. So we've recommenced those activities along both Military Road just to the west of Standing Bear Lake site, as well as on site. So there you'll see some erection of structures that have been going up in the general area. On the generation side of things, a couple things to note. The bottom left-hand picture, you'll see what's one of our generator step-up transformers. We have 3 of those at Standing Bear Lake site. Those had come quite a while ago, but they just completed, a subcontractor was out there putting on auxiliary equipment and doing final checks. And so that has been completed. So that's a major milestone at the site. The bottom middle picture depicts a fire water pump house, and that's just showing some progress there. It's been set on its foundation. And then a lot of work's going on just to the west of the engine hall. If you look at the upper right-hand picture, this is one of the horizontal engine exhaust duct work. So it's being erected and then insulated. And so we'll have 9 of those for our 9 engines at Wardzilla, or at Standing Bear Lake Station. From a challenges perspective, or project challenges, we still are paying attention to the supply chain efforts. At this particular site, we are awaiting some major equipment, which is our low voltage switch gear, which is anticipated to come at the end of the year, of December of this year. So with that, I'll move on to Turtle Creek, and then I'll open up for any general questions. At our Turtle Creek facility, we're just approximately 67% complete at the site. In the upper right-hand picture, you'll see our substation. There's a lot of good movement there. We did have a recent kind of a kickoff process of what the turnover process will look like between all the parties with our engineer, procure, construct vendor, as well as OPPD. That went really well. We did a kind of a quality control walk down, looking at what areas have to be addressed or fine-tuned before that turnover process. So making good headway and progress there. From a generation perspective, those bottom 3 pictures have different activities that are going on. The bottom left is what will be our water treatment building. So a lot of good progress is going on there. In the middle would be one of the 2 units construction of the stack. Both stacks are approximately about the same percent erected, which is probably just a little under 0.5%, 50%, excuse me. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see the building kind of there is that power distribution center. It houses various electrical equipment. And then to the right-hand side is what are called station service transformers. They kind of take the voltage and drop it down. And then those help feed different ancillary equipment around the site. For this site, some of the challenges still kind of focus on the commissioning efforts. We've had several meetings with all of our parties and making good progress on what that schedule will look like. Also, this site also was focusing on generator step-up transformers. We're happy to report they're in the general area of Omaha, and we're looking to coordinate through the heavy hauler to get those to site here the next couple weeks. So there'll be some activity there. And then I just wanted to also note, we did have recently a site tour with both local and state officials, and I know Chair Williams was in attendance as well. So with that, I'll open it up to see if there's any questions before I turn it over to Joe. Right. We've looked at the final reports and our subject matter experts have reviewed it. Everything looks promising and good there. We're in alignment with the performance, and we're just waiting for the final document to be signed. But everything's been reviewed by our SMEs, and the units are almost here. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Staff with pressure and schedule. Yeah, I mean, they're well behind. So it's pressure.
Yeah, for both sites, it'd be Q3 of 2024 is what we're looking at right now.
I'd say there's a little bit of this around. Having conversations, including one of Zachary's executives coming in this Thursday for another discussion. So timing and schedule risks.
And follow on there, that's different than the timeline we anticipated at the beginning of the project, but it does include a shift beyond timeline to a credit for that season, correct?
That's
And we have taken steps to mitigate the risk there. Yes.
That's right.
So yeah, I think
this is a good example of planning. So early on, when we started to see the risks and we stacked them up and said, you know, does this look like that there could be a reasonable shift to the right? And so Brad's team and my team made the decision early on to contract for capacity in the marketplace. After we did so, we found that there were other utility stuff on the market. At that point, it became very difficult for them to find additional capacities. There's not a lot out there. So really good coordination took place in that particular space. Would have rather not been in that, but the fact that we worked together, I think was needed.
appreciate the collaboration, and thanks again for the tour.
And to clarify also, the fact that they're not accredited or they may not meet the accreditation deadline doesn't mean that we're not going to operate. It's very important, and we'll have as soon as they're energized to start injecting and really take advantage of the assets.
So would anyone like to follow up about interconnection timeline with SPP at this point, or is there a status update, or are we still same status as?
No change from the last report.
That's good. And again, thanks for the tour. I did appreciate being there. I can confirm all the things on those photos look actually even more completed than they were shown there. So appreciate the opportunity to walk through with others who also know the benefits of these projects. Thanks very much.
It was really beneficial, as you saw, because they were at the table with us at the very beginning, and it's almost like, wow, they helped build this. So it was great.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Megan.
It's easy to see when you're on site, the complexities that to build facilities like this, and along the way, the amount of stuff that ends up being on the ground, you don't even know is there, is pretty obvious to you as you're part of as you come along part of the construction process. Proud of the team. Megan, I'm sure, is happy to be out of the site in daylight, having good conversations. This team has put in a lot of hours. Lots of collaboration with our EPC provider, and I'm proud of the way that they've shown up. They're definitely tired.
Jeff?
Good afternoon, everyone. Joe Lang, Director of Generation Strategy and Origination. So hope we can dive in this lane. Okay, just some quick updates here. Last month reported that Platteview was approximately 50% complete and through construction, and now it's approximately 65% complete. On track for the intended COD of May 1st, 2024. So everything's going well there. Director Williams and Director Mohoff attended a review of the facility and et cetera. And if you recall, we were coming over a hill, and off to the right-hand side, there was some cables that they were starting to put into the ground. So that was kind of the beginnings of the burying of those underground cables. So that has increased notably to connect the facilities and get back to the inverters, et cetera, and the substation. Still, regular updates with Saunders County board members. There was a couple that were in attendance with us, so they were able to tour the facility along with. But other than that, certainly the design's been done and everything's going reasonably well up there. No hiccups to report there. Next
is energization estimated timeline.
May 1st, 2024, which was the intended and target COD, and everything's on track for that deadline currently. Next slide is just an aerial photo for those that recall the specific kind of parcel areas that are out there. There's three kind of distinct areas, and this is the southern parcel. So things are certainly coming along out there with module installation, et cetera. Next slide.
Not sure.
Maybe this heavy graphic. No worries. While it's transitioning, next slide, we'll dive into K Junction. So some of the items on K Junction Solar. For those likely recall, we purchased K Junction in July of this year. The generation interconnection agreement became effective in August 1st. So that's the interconnection agreement between OPPD, Nebraska Public Power District, and Southwest Power Pool. So all is structured there. Currently in the process of evaluating project schedule and different contingencies, et cetera, equipment, various parties, and so laying that out and what the upcoming schedule and processes will be. Community engagement, stakeholder engagement, heavily engagement by Lisa Olson's team and Brooke Aiken, Dustin Marvel, and even earlier today with Brad attended the perennial Public Power District board meeting out in York County. So engaging with perennial as well on the project for awareness and potential participation and engagement with them. Those discussions are going well. York County, Village of McCool Junction, both certainly have their own bodies of regulations that apply to the facility.
working with them closely in the development of those regulations and supporting their efforts there, and want to make sure that we have good balanced regulations that certainly protect the county, protect the project, et cetera. Then efforts and various discussions we've had with NPPD even as early as earlier this morning, just around their facilities that will be needed to support the project and some of the timelines there and how we can coordinate the project schedules in the most efficient, effective way. I believe that's it. Absent any questions?
Are we at a point where we can project when your county or will might make policy updates associated with solar?
Yep, that's certainly a big topic on my mind as well. So McCool Junction likely later yet this year, and then York County most likely potentially later this year or early next year, maybe more likely. But we are engaging with them to try to find those methods and setbacks, et cetera, that make sense and protect the adjacent landowners, et cetera, make sure it's in a good, fair, reasonable kind of balanced perspective.
And then from an overall project timeline or project management perspective, next would be determination about how the project might be constructed.
Correct. Yep. So there are some equipment perspectives that we're certainly looking into and how we can ensure lead times of equipment, and we're approaching that in the most diligent fashion. But yes, exactly. And how we construct the facility, in essence, the basis, we need to know the regulations so we know what the facility design looks like, what, the land, the setbacks, et cetera. And then working with potential external parties to see if folks and developers would want to own it, PPA it back to us, or whether we can potentially develop it ourselves, and just kind of evaluating the total costs of those types of structures and what that all looks like. So we want to make sure we have all the information necessary to make those decisions, but certainly looking at engaging with outside, third-party developers to help with that.
This last one is a very important point that we have not decided on the ownership structure. It's still yet to be determined. Not only capital costs up front, but long-term operational costs and logistics are a factor. And so we'll make those determinations in time. At the same time, we're having conversations with local jurisdictions, with York County and others on economic development impact into those areas, right? And what to expect from us, from a developer, and how do we engage with those communities. So all of those are topics of discussion. We have not made decisions, but I think it's a very important one that will eventually come back to the board as a reporting item. Very important to continue with this project and make it work in the best possible way for us.
Quite a bit of education along the way and bringing various leaders along the way. So lots of lessons learned from other projects that we've done.
I think it's been helpful too, just having a conversation with the community on how they'd like to see something like this delivered, and the simplicity of a community talking with a public power district, and that being kind of the extent of it, as opposed to having other parties or a different structure. I think
Someone
that's,
else coming in.
yeah, so far, I think that's been well received.
And then working with, like, we've been talking about public power, right? And that really resonates. We've also been talking to Perennial because that's their public power entity. And so they've been extremely helpful. And Brad went out and talked to their board of directors today.
That's great.
Great, thank you.
Anybody, anything else? All right, well, complicated times, lots of things happening. I think it's important that we all remember to be calm, be brave. It'll be okay.
Be patient.
And with that, we are adjourned.